Today we have a class that combines two different topics. The first is a breakdown of Tifa Lockhart's character models from Final Fantasy VII Remake. And we'll look at those from both an artistic and a technical standpoint to see what can we learn to create better character art ourselves in the future. And the second topic that we'll talk about is that we will talk about how can we integrate a character within Marmoset Toolbag 4. That's a particular engine that I use quite a lot to render out characters myself, either when I'm prototyping or when I'm even rendering out characters from my own portfolio, because it's very easy to use, but it's also very powerful. And so that is my go-to engine when I'm working on characters these days. And we'll talk about how can we set up a character in there, how can we set up shaders, how can we understand the way that the lighting works in there, and what can we tweak also on the rendering front to get a better render out for our own characters. Also that you yourself in the future know how to use Toolbag to set up your own characters and your own rendering scenes for your own portfolio. Before we begin, I simply want to say that Tifa Lockhart's model belongs to Square Enix, and it is used here in a purely educational context, because I believe that there is a lot here that we can learn from doing a breakdown of those together. We won't talk about where you can acquire that particular data, but all I will say is that Google holds the answers to many questions in life. Let's get started. Tifa really takes good care of her skin, right? Take a look at that. That skin is so nice. It's so high res. Wow, face looks so gorgeous. In fact, when you zoom in here, look at how crazy high res all of this data is actually. Now, for those who wonder, the texture that is applied on her face is actually just a 248 texture. But all of this data here, all this crazy high-res data actually comes from the fact that we have a tiling detail map applied on top that is right now tiling about 24 times over the face. And you can see the result of tiling that particular detail map and blending that with the base normal map. In fact, if I go here and I play with the tiling value, you can see what's kind of happening here. And if I get rid of it completely, now we're actually looking at the base normal map of the face without any detail map that is applied. But that's a very common technique used in video game to simply on surfaces to make them look a little bit more high res is to overlay on top of the unique textures that is used over a surface, like in the head in this particular case, a detail map of some kind that is usually a pretty small texture. Can be a 512, sometimes a 1024, but 512 is usually good enough for these, that tiles many times and really contains a lot of very, very tiny details, as you can see. And that tiles and that blends with the base texture that we have to give the impression that the surface is actually more high-res than it winds up really being in the end. You can actually kind of tell because there's no detail map right now that's applied on the lips. So the lips actually look a little bit lower resolution than the rest. But because it's lips and we're kind of more or less expecting that zone of the face to be more or less smooth, then it's not really bothersome at a regular distance at which we would look at the character. By the way, can you see here the connection between the head and the torso? No, you can't, right? But they certainly have a connection that is there. In fact, if I select the head here, you can see that the outline of it is actually kind of here. And so the head is actually separated from the rest of the body, but you wouldn't actually be able to tell because the texture looks like it is continuous. But not just the texture, the surface normals also have to be tweaked so that we can blend the head with the body and have a seamless transition between these 2 points there. So I actually talk about that in one of our previous videos. But if you don't believe me, these two things are actually separate. See here, I can actually take the head and I can actually move it around. And we can see that there's actually a gap here that starts to form between the head and the body there. And okay, that's nightmare fuel right there. So that concept of detail maps that are tiling over a surface to make it look more high res is actually used in a lot of different places over this particular character. If I'm zooming here around the skirt, in fact, you can kind of tell like all the different types of leathers that she has. You know, she's got like some type of leather here that looks like a little bit of like some type of lizard skin here a little bit. There's other leather here that looks more like just standard, I suppose, cow leather. Fortunately, we can definitely tell that Tifa is not vegan, unfortunately. And all of those details, you know, it looks super, super high res, right? So all of that comes from those detail maps. In fact, if I go here and I select the material that is applied, you'll be able to really tell here. So there is here too, over the surface of the skirt here, you can see that there's also a letter detail map that is here, and that is also tiling many, many times. Right now, I've set it to about 20. I don't really know what these actual in-game values are, but I've just more or less just reconstructed the shader here in Marmoset Toolbag, and I have set this to what looked to me to be a pretty good value here. But same thing actually will actually happen here, right? If I actually boosted the tiling value right here, you can see that now we're winding up having detail that looks even more high res. So that's really, really cool, and that's a technique that we commonly use within video games to have these tiling detail maps applied over surfaces to really give the impression that there's some extremely crisp and sharp details, because the base textures that she has pretty much everywhere over her character are all 2K textures, as you can see here. So the base normal map that she has, although she does have more than one, though, that does need to be said here. But all the textures that are used are all 2K textures. And if I get rid of the detail map completely, you can see now the surface, and you can see the pixelation that is within the surface there. So that's really what detail map do, and this is a very common technique that we use within video games. By the way, does anyone know what logo this is? I feel as if maybe some really big Final Fantasy VII fans here would maybe know that if this actually represents a particular in-game logo. I don't actually know. I'm kind of curious to know if this is like a bit of an Easter egg that is sort of over the surface there. By the way, look at how crazy high-res all of these details are that she has over these gloves, right? Like you can see like little wires here and stuff. This is like super crazy detail. This is probably so that these can be used in like cinematic shots and stuff like that. But yeah, like who actually knew that, as you rotate this around, she's got a little tiny little bomb there, a little pendant that is attached to her glove there. That's so cute, right? It's so like crazy cute. Now I need to find that for myself somewhere. Oh, those would look gorgeous as like earrings or something like that. But yeah, like who knew that she has this little tiny little bomb that is here as a little Easter egg. And in fact, if you're kind of wondering like, yeah, so what's happening on the other side? Is there something else? Actually, yeah, there actually is something else on the other side. Look at that cute little tiny chocobo she's got there. It's so like super cute. So like she has these little Easter eggs over her, and those are super cute. I really love that they have added those on the 3D model. As you can see, those sort of bracelets, I suppose, or those little chains that she has around her wrists there, they're actually just an alpha that is applied on a polygon plane. And it's as simple as that. So that's not actual 3D geometry. And it kind of makes sense, right? Because if you wanted to do something like this using 3D geometry, this would be crazy high res. This would like eat through your polygon budget. Really, really, really crazy. But you want to do something like this, you just put a strip of polygon. On top of that, you have a repeating texture of some kind. We can actually take a look at the texture here. So here's the texture. This is the texture that's actually used over the whole glove. So there is a texture only for the gloves themselves, which is really, really important because you want to be able to swap the gloves in game, right? So depending on the glove that she has, or rather depending on the glove that the player has equipped and that is using for gameplay purposes, you want to be able to swap the model out. So because of that, they have separated the gloves as a separate texture, which is really, really, really great. But as you can see in here, we actually have an alpha that is used here. And so here is the chain that is used over her wrists there. So that's how they have done that. It's very, very, very simple, but it looks pretty cool because you still have a normal map that is applied on there. So you still get the impression that you're looking at 3D volumes when you look at these little bracelets. Really, really cool, but also very, very optimized. And that's wonderful. By the way, I just absolutely love what's happening with her legs here. She has these very long, very slender legs, right? So we have these very, very long legs. And then right at the bottom here, she's wearing these very, very big and massive boots there. And it creates a really beautiful contrast in terms of shape because you have here the legs, which are very long and slender. And at the bottom here, you have these boots that are bigger and squarer. And it creates this really, really beautiful silhouette break that is right here. Like they could have made the top of these boots completely tight around the ankles. They could have done something like that. It's kind of tempting to do that when you're modeling boots like these. But the fact that they have kept the boots here open and loose, it just creates these really beautiful ankle breaks here that I absolutely love as the legs get inserted within the boots there. So that's really, really beautiful. And that's definitely something I want to learn for myself as a bit of a style tip in the future. One thing I really love is how they have expressed different types of materials with the surface details. Like we have seen here in the case of leather, how the leather, like we can tell that there's different types of leather over the skirt here just by looking at the surface details that are sort of there. We can kind of imagine from which animal these different types of leather have come. But like other things too, like if you take a look here, like let's say around whatever the name of this is, I don't actually know, but you can kind of tell that there's different metallic pieces that all have kind of different material properties. Like you have this piece here that looks like it's sand casted. Just based on the surface texture that is kind of left, because when you sand cast something, that sort of sand texture stays embedded within the metallic object that you have just casted there. And we can kind of see that here, and that's really, really cool. And then you have like other things that look like they're sort of made of some type of metal, or like you have metal that is exposed under paint, And so there's this really beautiful attention to detail and really communicating different types of materials through the surface details that we have pretty much everywhere over the character. And that's really, really, really beautiful. Take a look here at like that super high-res textile texture that we have here. Now, that too, I believe, is a detail map that is applied here. If I just select the material, we can actually take a look at that. And yeah, you can see there's actually a fabric tiling detail here that is applied, which is a 256 texture actually. So it's really, really small. But since it tiles many, many times, right now it's tiling over like 20 times, it's really giving you that impression that the surface winds up being very, very high res. Here I can play with the tiling, as you can see. And so once again, this is a really common technique that we use, but it's applied and it's used here to really vary the surface details that we have everywhere over the character. And it's really, really beautiful. Look at all those scratches here. Those look like they've almost been purposefully placed like this. Like this isn't just a dumb repeating texture there, but there's part of it that's just a little bit scratched more than the rest of the clip that's here. So that's really, really, really awesome that they've paid such a great attention to details like that. By the way, take a look at these leather straps here, and I love how you have black over the surface of these leather straps, and then you have brown here on the sides of that. It really looks like something that's been built in like real life. I can actually look at these straps and sort of imagine for myself how something like this would have been built in like real life, where you kind of start by tanning a piece of leather, like a really, really big piece, right? And then you add this kind of black top coat paint on top of that after the leather has been tanned. And then afterward, you go with you take this really big piece of leather and you start to cut in there the different straps that she would use afterward over her character there. So it's a really beautiful attention to detail. They've really paid really close attention to have a different color on the sides of the straps as the color and as the material properties that is a bit more reflective that is applied on the top of the straps there. It's a really, really beautiful attention to detail that they have done. And we have a video on that too, by the way, on the channel, if you want to hear a little bit more about how leather is tanned and the different tanning methods there. And it's kind of a bit of a leather 101 class for character artists there. So go and check that out if you want to hear a little bit more about leather. I'm not an expert in this particular field, but I have studied leather a little bit here and there during my career so far. So I'm happy to share all that knowledge with you. So yeah, we have a beautiful attention to detail everywhere over her character model. It's really, really fascinating to take a look at that. Let's take a look at the face and see what's going on there. So first of all, we have eyelashes that are modeled out. So that's the same thing that we saw on Cloud. We can see that they have used actual geometry for these as opposed to hair cards. So that's really, really cool. For the eyes themselves, I actually had to do a bit of manual work myself because, of course, I don't have access to the crazy shaders that they have in-game to make their eyes look wonderful the way that they are. So I had to do a bit of manual work myself here to make sure that I could bring the eyes of Tifa to be as close as possible to the in-game model that they have. And some of the work that I had done actually was to try and make the iris actually look a little bit concave. As you can see, if you take a look at where the specular highlight is right now, it's kind of here over the cornea for her, what is her left eye here. But you can see that the part of the iris that is actually lit right now is on the inside here. So on the inside of her left eye, that's the part here that is actually lit up. And as I rotate the light around, you can see this will actually kind of switch around. So now that the light, you can see it's kind of hitting the inside of her cornea there, you can see that the part of the eye that is lit right now is on the outside. So that's actually something that's really, really cool and really wonderful when we can really capture that on 3D models. And unfortunately, the data that they had or that I had access to begin with really didn't have that particular effect in there. So it kind of it actually kind of looked a little bit like this. So the data, it kind of looked a little bit like this when I got it here. So once again, that's because I simply don't have access to the shaders that they have. But take a look at her eyes now. This is actually, if we just simply plug in Tifa's eye textures over the model in the Marmoset, it actually kind of looks like this, you know? So looks like she's wearing sort of contact lenses. Am I the only one who gets bothered by this, by the way? When I watch like, especially when I watch like TV shows or something and they don't quite have the budget or the capacity to make colored eyes actually have that slight concavity, the way that we have talked about it before. You know, you can always kind of tell that some characters, sometimes they're just wearing contact lenses on set and they've kind of have kept that in there. And am I the only one who gets bothered by this, by the way? Because sometimes I just can't see anything else when I watch TV shows. Geralt, I'm talking about you right here. So what I have done to address that is that I have actually added both a displacement map to the eyes to really push the irises inward, as you can see, as I turn this on, right? You can see the kind of effect that actually gives us. You can see that now we wind up having irises that are a little bit concave. So take a look at this from like profile. So I've done that first of all. And we can actually play with the scale here to see the kind of effect that that does. It's probably what's happening to her when she sees a cloud somewhere. She's like, "Cloud, baby, here I am." Can actually push this the other way. Actually, that kind of reminds me of a movie. I'm not sure which one again. Anyway, let's get back on track, right? So yeah, displacement map here kind of helps to push that inward. Now, clearly when you play the game, they don't have that issue in there. So they've done something within the shader to push the irises in some way, shape, or form. But in this particular case, this actually works really, really well. So that's the first thing that I've done, but it still isn't quite getting rid of the kind of perceived convexity that we have to the eyes here. So what I've done afterwards is that I've simply added in the detail map slot that we have here within Marmoset, I've just added a different texture to try and make the eyes look even more concave, as you can see here. So that's with the detail map, and that is without. You can see the eyes look a little bit more flat in this particular case. Now, it's not necessary to do this using a detail map. I could have done that by simply modifying the base normal map that she has for the eyes, but I guess I was kind of lazy, so I sort of did it this way. Take a look at the hair, by the way. The hair is so wonderful. They've done such a fantastic job. Square, you need to teach me how to do hair, please. I really need to learn all of your secrets there, because every haircut that comes out of that studio is so incredibly wonderful. You can even see like little wispy hairs that they have added, right? Like sort of little flyaways that are kind of going in different, in a direction that is different than the rest of the hair that it's kind of following there. So it's really, really cool how they have added all these little wispy hairs pretty much everywhere. It's really, really wonderful. And if we take a look at the wireframe, you can actually see how these wispy hairs that they have added, there's actually like 3 or 4 of those for a whole polygon strip, you know? So they have this huge polygon strip, or like all these different polygon strips that they have going on everywhere around the head, and on some of these, you can see that all that they have is like 3 or 4 individual hairs that is following those polygon strips. And that's how they create all these wonderful little flyaway hairs that we have over her head. That's really, really wonderful. So yeah, Square is, as always, certainly some of the best as it comes to hair creation. Tifa, do you have any cavities? Let's take a look. Let's just open this. Let's take a look in there. Let's see what it's looking. Actually, it would be simpler if I took the jaw and just opened the jaw, right? There we go. Let's take a look in there. See what's going on. Let's take a look. Ooh, no, I don't see any cavities. No cavities in there, at least not on the bottom. What about the top? That one may be a bit harder, right? Let's see if we can, I think we need a flashlight in here though. This isn't gonna be enough. Let's add a light, okay. All right, that's better. Let's see. Nope, no cavities. Perfect teeth, wonderful. I will admit, one thing I was actually wondering about Tifa when I was playing the game was whether they were using some real-time cloth simulation over the skirt, or if they were using something else here. And looking at the 3D model, that actually becomes very apparent to us that they're actually not using any type of real-time cloth simulation when it comes to her skirt. And because we can see here all of the different bones that is over the skirt here. And if we move those bones around, you can see that it's actually pulling over the skirt there. So there's some type of baked animation that they are using to control the movement and the dynamics of the skirt in real time, as opposed to use some type of real-time cloth simulation. And it makes a lot of sense, okay? Because actually using real-time cloth simulation for this would actually be kind of problematic, considering the fact that she's wearing such a skimpy outfit. Because unfortunately, real-time cloth is actually really, really hard to control, okay? And real-time cloth has a tendency to bug out and sort of sometimes even just completely go through the body and appear on the other side. Because, you know, the thing about characters within video games, right, is that they are often moving on the screen. Sometimes when they're even off of the camera or off camera, they're sometimes teleporting around the screen in different circumstances. And what happens is that sometimes the cloth, it just doesn't move fast enough to update itself. It does happen that when a character moves so quickly, sometimes the cloth will literally go through the character and appear on the other side. So that's a common thing that happens for real-time cloth. And so if you imagine that they had used real-time cloth here for the skirt, just imagine that, you know, like they're using real-time cloth simulation for the skirt. Imagine what would happen, the kind of bug and the kind of screenshots that would be floating around the web. That wouldn't be very nice. So it makes total sense that they have decided to instead simply use bone animation to control all these different elements that she has around her skirt. And certainly the skirt itself as well. By the way, take a look at this. Tifa's model has 165, in fact, even more than that. We're up to, here, 200,000 triangles for her in-game model. That's a crazy amount, right? Like, that's actually more than Cloud. Now, in her defense, though, that does include the gloves, and the gloves are about 20,000 triangles, and that's a swappable object. So that's sort of more or less equivalent to the Buster Sword on Cloud. Maybe not in terms of polygon count, but at least in terms of functionality. But still, we have like over 200,000 triangles that is used over the character there. So that's a crazy amount, right? But hey, that's what modern video games can support, you know? Now, you know, as we had talked about in the case of Cloud, you know, not every character can always necessarily afford that for every video game out there. But certainly, you know, if you are, let's say, working on a portfolio piece and you're like, yeah, how many polygons can I afford? You can totally have over 100,000. And if it's really justified, over 200,000 triangles for a particular character that you're working on. And of course, here too, we have, in this case here, we have, as you can see, we actually have 90,000 triangles just for the hair. It's actually 45,000 triangles, but the hair is double-sided. So you have to double that because that's what happens in real time. And take a look at this, right? You can't actually see the place here when you look at the 3D model. You can't actually see the place where the head actually transitions within the body there. That particular transition has been erased because they have tweaked the normals, and they have averaged the normals between the head and the body to make sure that you couldn't actually see that transition there between those two meshes, even if in the end those two meshes are separate. Now, there's a few things here that I personally like a bit less. Like, I don't personally really like having this kind of really, really big gradient here. That's the kind of thing that usually creates normal problems once you're within a game there. So I would have liked to see either a support edge here, or maybe a different smoothing group or a hard edge here, just to kind of get rid within the low res of these kind of gradients that are there. So yeah, that's a minor preference perhaps, but it doesn't necessarily cost a lot of polygons. And as far as I'm concerned, it leads to better bakes afterwards. So that's something I think that probably could have been improved here. One thing too that we can really pay attention to when you're looking at the low res here is the fact that we have all these loops that are converging here within the armpit. So there's all these loops that are going around the arm itself, and there's a very high concentration of circumferential loops that are within the armpit itself, and that's really, really great. Like we have these much bigger polygons here and pretty much everywhere else, and that makes a ton of sense, right? Because you want there to be extra geometry that will be available to you so that when you raise the arm, if we go ahead here and we just raise the arm itself, you want to have enough geometry here so that as you raise the arm itself, those extra polygons can actually kind of stretch a little bit. And certainly since she does quite a lot of moves in game, it's really good to have that in there, so that you have enough geometry so that you can properly raise the arm itself. And all of these extra loops that are all concentrated within the armpit will all stretch, and that will stop it so that when the arms are raised, it's going to stop the zone from looking just very blocky and very low res there. So that's really, really cool that I have done that. Another thing we can see is the liberal use of triangles over the mesh in different places. Although this mesh is kind of triangulated right now, of course, I can actually go in here and I can remove what looks like the diagonals over the mesh that are baked in because of the video card. And so if I go in here and actually remove a bunch of these diagonals here, what we're left with is pretty much essentially just the quads that they have started with. In this case here, I'm not completely sure which one I should be removing, but I think it would probably look kind of something like this, looking at this. Take a look at all these triangles that are left over the surface, right? And it makes sense, right? Because they really needed to have a little bit of extra geometry here to support those kind of big folds that are over the shirt, but I didn't want to take the time or bother to go in there and try to quad everything after the fact, because it's kind of not necessary to do that, and triangles can deform just as well as quads can when they're actually placed properly over the surface. And so this is yet another example of triangles that are used in games over characters to a very, very good and very optimized effect there. So that's kind of in line with that video that I have recorded over the fact that I think that in some cases, quads and edge loops are overrated. So if you haven't checked that one out, go and check it out. Now, some of you have reminded me that that video is a little incendiary and exaggerates things a little bit too much. And I know you're right, but seriously, what are you expecting out of a video that is using Kefka as the thumbnail? For the hair, we can actually see that just like on Cloud, there's this little mystery right now where we actually have, as opposed to have a single layer of hair that gets double-sided afterward within the game engine, we can actually see that there are two layers of polygons here where the normal have been completely flipped. And I'm starting to think that this is actually an artifact of the video card from which these models were extracted. I'm starting to think that that's actually what's going on here, as opposed to them making a deliberate choice to manually take the model and duplicate it and then flip the normals before exporting that out to the video game. But I don't actually know whether that's the case or not. But I'd love to know if anyone here is a programmer, a visual programmer, and if you could actually chime in on this. If you take a surface, you flag it as a double-sided, you export it to the game, and then you extract the model out of the game, do you expect the extracted model to look like this, where everything that was double-sided, even if it got imported as a single polygonal layer, will now be actually two different polygonal layers once the model has been extracted out of the video card. I'm actually kind of wondering if that's the case, and I'd love to know what a visual programmer here or a game programmer would actually think of that. Just like for the flaps, we can see that the hair has been individually rigged. So they're really not using any type of real-time simulation here over the hair. Everything has been manually rigged. You can see here, I can actually select the bones and I can move them around. And once again, for me, that simply makes a lot of sense because real-time simulation really always comes with bugs and just other unforeseen things that you wouldn't necessarily want to happen there to something that has real-time cloth simulation or real-time simulation of some kind. So it makes sense, that they have rigged this and that the hair is probably controlled using some type of baked animation within the game. As you see the hair sort of move around, it's not actually moving around in real time or rather simulated in real time. It's all probably animations that have been baked within the rig there. For those who are wondering about texel density, what that actually looks like, we can see here I have applied a checkerboard over the whole characters. We can actually see what is the density or the relative density of texels that we have pretty much everywhere over the character there. By the way, this particular texture that I'm using right now, it's really useful because it actually tells me not only if there is stretching over the surface, but because there are letters and there are numbers in there, it also helps me to see what is the direction of the surface, because if you're using a basic checkerboard, you may not be able to tell if a surface has been mirrored or if it has been flipped 90 degrees on the side the way that we have here. But it's actually very, very useful to know that once you are texturing, what is the directionality of the surface there. So that's what the checkerboard gives me. And if you want to have access to this checkerboard texture, it's actually available in the handouts. So yeah, we can actually see how the texel density kind of varies over the whole surface. And it's kind of interesting, right? Because different parts of her outfit really has a different texel density. In fact, things like the clips here, like the clips that we had talked about here, I know it may be hard to tell here, but the clip that is right in front here, and where I was actually saying how they have all these crazy nice super high-res scratches there that are very, very interesting. You can see that this particular clip is actually more dense in terms of texels than the rest of the outfit there. And it makes sense in a way, right? To kind of lower the texel density that they would have, let's say, over the skirt or like the places where they actually use a lot of cloth. It kind of makes sense in those places there to lower the texel density because in those places, they're actually using those detail maps that we have talked about, right? If we go back here and we select this and we play around with the tiling value here, because we have tiling detail maps and because they had thought through, okay, where we will be using tiling detail maps over the surface, these detail maps actually make up for the lower texel density that we have in different places. But places like those belt buckles and stuff, they couldn't really easily use detail maps to create those scratches there. So they figured, okay, since we have to have a unique texture to create those scratches there, it's important for us that we have a higher texel density there. So that's really, really cool that they have done that. They've really thought through, okay, where should we maximize the texel density and where can we lower it and make up with detail maps in order to simply use our texture budget in the most optimal way. So that's really, really cool that they have done that. Here again, we can see how crazy high res the face is in relation to the rest of the body, right? As we're looking at the texel density there's this very, very, very clear break that happens once we move off of the torso and into the head proper there, to the head geometry there. Just look at how crazy insane high res the texel density is for the face in relation to the rest of the body there, right? And if you thought the body was high res, and if you thought that the face was high res, right? Take a look at the crazy texel density that we have over the eyes, They've really made it so that you can have these ultra close-up shots of the eyes and have all of that look really amazingly high res. They really made a really, really cool job there. They've really made this so that the eyes have the highest texel density of the whole character. That's really, really crazy. And just like for the face, take a look at the gloves, right? Take a look at how crazy high res the gloves are. And same thing, right? It's like you really want to be able to zoom in on the gloves. You know, there's probably cutscenes, there's probably other circumstances in which you can see the gloves from really, really close up. And so they've really made the deliberate choice to make sure that these were very, very high res. I love to look at their textures because they're always so well organized. It's something I could actually see on Cloud as well. I didn't bring that up on the video on Cloud, but it's something that I've kind of noticed there, and that really comes back in this case as well, is just how well organized their textures are. And by that, I don't necessarily mean that they're well packed, because they certainly are well packed. They've really had a lot of fun, and it must have some Tetris masters over there. But it's not just how well packed they are, but also how well kind of zoned the different elements of the body is. And what I mean by that is, if we take a look at this particular texture, right? Like they've really made it so that they have grouped together pretty much everything that was made out of skin. They've really grouped that into one zone of the texture. And then let's say that we take a look at, let's say this here, right? We'll have here this zone that is just the shirt. We'll have at the bottom here, these are the boots that are at the bottom. I think these are the socks that she's wearing over her legs that is right there. So these are the kind of sort of bracery thing that she has over her left arm. So like the texture is actually nicely broken down into different zones, like when they have done the packing there. And that's just, it makes it easier afterward, like slightly easier when you're texturing things, because you don't have elements of your texture, or rather you don't have like elements that are side by side over the 3D model that within the texture are completely scattered over the surface. Which is fine too from a texturing standpoint. If your UVs are completely sort of almost randomized, it's kind of fine. If you're using something like Substance Painter to texture, you may not necessarily care too much about what is happening within the UVs there. But still, there's part of me that just feels very satisfied looking at textures where the different elements have been so well organized. Another thing I want to bring your attention to, this is something we don't actually kind of intuitively think about sometimes, but this character is actually very demanding from a texturing standpoint, in the sense that, as far as the values are concerned over the whole character, because not only does Tifa both have a white tank top, but she has a lot of black over her character as well. So she has like pretty much the highest amount of contrast you could have in terms of materials or in terms of albedo there, right? She has white here and she has black everywhere else. So from a texturing standpoint, that's actually a pretty big challenge, because you have to make sure that all of those, that the white isn't so bright that the lighting just completely washes it out. But you have to make sure that the black isn't so dark that it also is pretty much invisible, or just too black as you are, let's say, properly lighting the whites that are used over the character. So sometimes you do see people like who don't actually think about this. Now, this is like PBR texturing 101, but you do see sometimes people who will like make a white shirt completely white within their textures, like RGB 255. And then that's really, really, really hard to light afterward, because it's just so bright that you can't actually light it properly without it being completely blown out there. But they have really gone here and they have really respected, what we call PBR rules when it comes to creating albedos for a character. And if we sample here the white that they're using here, you can see that the white that they're using, it's actually like around 225, which is, I believe it's around 90%, right? That's about 90%. In terms of brightness. So they have that last 10% that they haven't gone into, from 225 up to 255, right? So the brightest part of the character is about 90% bright, if you kind of really think about it. And the darkest part of the character is here about 40 out of 255 RGB. So that's about 15%, right? I think. So yeah, it makes it so that they're not using pure blacks and they're not using pure whites anywhere over the character. And that makes it so that you can light this character afterward and have both the dark parts of the character and have the bright parts of the character all kind of more or less look equally good within a typical lighting scenario. Also, one thing about the letter that we can really point out is not only is there different detail maps, or rather, like there is the impression of different leathers that is expressed through the details over the surface, but you can actually kind of see as well how the roughness value, like this part here, this kind of leatherish part here is kind of, you can see that it's a bit glossier. It's not quite as rough as the flaps here, or the pleats rather, that she has over her skirt there. So they're also varying the roughness in different places to really communicate the impression that there are different leathers, And if we take a look at the socks here, you can see how way rougher the surface actually is in relation to what is happening over the skirt, right? So there's this really beautiful attention to the roughness values that you have everywhere over the character to really communicate different types of material, even if in the end everything winds up having the same albedo value, the same level of black. This is actually something that Frédéric Bennett over at IDOS Montreal had actually taught me when I was working there. It's what I like to call now the Darth Vader effect, right? If you take a look at Darth Vader, he's wearing black everywhere, but you can actually tell apart the different materials that he has based upon the roughness of that particular material. The cape is a lot rougher than the helmet that is very, very glossy, right? So even if you have the same albedo value, you can easily communicate the impression of different materials just by playing around with the roughness value that that particular material will actually have. So let's now talk about how to bring Tifa's character model within Marmoset 4. If you have a different model, of course, you can follow along with that, and we will talk about all of the steps involved in taking the model from your preferred 3D software within Toolbag. So in this particular case, I have Tifa's model that is within Maya, but you could start from Blender, you could start from 3ds Max, doesn't really matter where you're starting from, because we will simply export the model out at this stage as a grayscale model, of course. Although before we do export this out to Toolbag, it bears to say, of course, that the model has already been fully unwrapped and fully textured, because Marmoset Toolbag, we essentially use that at the end of the pipeline to render out our character. Now, it does happen that Toolbag now has texturing tools as well. I've heard some people say that they like it. I've heard some people say that they prefer Painter. I personally haven't used Toolbag's texturing tool so far, so I don't have much of an opinion on that. But I do know that Toolbag now has texturing tools, of course. So you could conceivably texture your character in there. But in this particular case, we have the model that has already been fully textured for us. So we will really only talk about how do we take the particular 3D model, how we take the textures, and how do we build interesting shaders and an interesting lighting for our character. So let's go ahead and do that. I have already, and in fact, well, it's not me, but the model itself has already been separated out as separate shaders too, of course. So anything that is skin, let's say right now, has a different shader than the rest of the body, even if the textures between the body, the skin, and the rest of the body, even if there's a shared texture set for the clothes and the body, as we have seen, that is the case. Part of the skin of the character is actually embedded within a bigger texture that has other stuff in there. We still want at this stage to apply a different shader to everything that is made out of skin, because we will afterward use a skin shader over that within Marmoset Toolbag. So if it's not clear to you right now what should be treated as a separate shader than everything else, I hope that it will become clear as we build together these different materials within Marmoset Toolbag. I hope that will become a bit clear to you, where you have an opportunity to apply a different shader to have special effects on certain parts of your character, let's say. At a minimum, you of course need to have one shader per texture set that you have over a character. So at a minimum, you would have one shader for the head, one shader for the hair, one shader for the rest of the body, assuming that the body is in a separate texture set from the rest of the face or from the head, but that is almost always the case. And that's it. So here, I'm going to export this out as an FBX. Once again, you can export this out as an FBX from whichever software you're working out of. There's really no restrictions there. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's export this out. And so this is Toolbag. If this is the first time that you have seen this particular software, you'll see that it's actually very simple. So I won't run you through too much of the interface right now, but you'll see that as we use it, things will start to make sense as to where they are placed. Everything in here is actually very, very straightforward. So let's go to File. Let's go to Import, or we can use the shortcut to Control-I to import something within Marmoset. And in here, I'm going to use the model I have exported out from Maya. So our FBX here, let's load that in here. And so this is Marmoset. And so on the right here, you can see all of the shaders that were applied within Maya. You can see that they are all here. Now, there's actually quite a lot, okay? So Square Enix has certainly had a lot of fun to create a lot of different shaders for their character. So we have quite a lot here to run through. So here in Bridge, I have all the textures that have been created for Tifa. By the way, I'm using Bridge simply because it allows me to see Targas and see the thumbnails that isn't there, because by default within Windows Explorer, you can't actually see that. So that's why I like to use Bridge in this particular case. And what we're going to do is to simply drag and drop pretty much all of these textures within these different texture slots that we have on the shaders that we have here. And we'll just slowly build these as we go, and we'll see where that actually brings us here. So the first shader that we have is here on top. It's called No Glove. I'm not actually sure where that is used, really. Let me just, in fact, just kind of maximize this so that we can see these two things at the same time. I'm not actually really sure where that is used over the character here, but worst case that we can do here is at the bottom here where it says albedo, one thing we can do is just to swap the color and see what actually changes color. So this is essentially what she has over her sleeves there. So it's probably this texture here, Tifa main A, that matches that. That would be my guess, really. So let's just take the albedo itself. Let's just drag and drop it within our albedo map slot here. And that looks like that is indeed the good texture. Of course, here, let's put the texture back to white. And let's simply drag and drop into all of these default slots that we have. So within the normal map here, let's go ahead and select that as well. So Tifa main A here, that's our normal map. Let's drop our roughness in there as well. In this particular case, we don't have a roughness per se. They just haven't really generated that. But if you have a texture named roughness, of course, that's where that will go. So in this case here, it's what they've called here specular, actually, _s that we have to use. So let's go ahead and drop that within our roughness map. And finally, we'll also have to use the metallist map, but let's take a look at the data that we already have and how that's already looking so far. So you can see it's not looking all that great so far. It's very likely, in fact, that the normals, you can kind of see that the normals, they don't quite look fine. They don't look terrible either, but anytime you feel as if there's something kind of a bit weird with the normal map that is applied over a surface, it's very likely that it's been baked with either the X or the Y that's been flipped within the baking software. So it's always good to, once you apply a normal map on a shader, just to go in here and just to try to flip either the Y or the X. And perhaps this isn't the shader that is the most obvious for that, but for me, flipping the Y kind of actually makes some of these bevels. If we look here at the surface, you can kind of see here the way that he reacts with light, it's not all that great, right? There seems to be something that's a bit off to it. But flipping the Y within the normal map here under surface fixes that for us. So that's wonderful. So that's great. For the roughness, these are obviously not really the way that we really expect the surface to look like, right? Like this is very, very glossy, but we probably expect this to be very rough. And then this surface here looks very rough, but we probably expect it to be very glossy. So we can invert here. We can just press this little button here to invert our micro surface texture or our roughness texture there. And that already looks for me a lot better. This looks rough the way that it should, and this looks a lot glossier there. So that already for me makes a lot more sense. Next we can talk about the metalness. Now, you won't necessarily always have a metalness texture if you don't have anything that's metallic over a surface. You obviously probably won't really have any uses for a metalness texture. But in this particular case, there are places here that are made of metal, right? These little rivets here, and like there's like paint chips too that look metallic. So in their case, I believe that the metalness map is would be this one here. So Tifa main B. Let's go ahead and drag and drop that. Now, this is probably not going to do anything because it kind of looks black like this. But in their case here, they have applied the metalness to, let me see here actually. So main B, main A. Oh, no, okay, sorry. Let me actually pay attention to the names here. So main A metalness, this one here. Let's go ahead and drag and drop that in there. And yeah, so they have here, if we get rid of the texture, everything kind of looks like it's kind of the same. But once I apply that metalness texture in there, you can see how these little rivets here, they seem to be a bit more metallic there. It's very subtle. Of course, if you have things that are very, very metallic, this will obviously make more sense. I'm also not completely sure why their metalness texture using an alpha channel for texture that has nothing else in there. It feels to me like that's a bit of a waste. There has to be a reason for that. I'm not really sure what that reason is, to be honest. There has to be a reason why this data is winding up like this. But, you know, ideally, maybe this metalness, you would maybe have it as the alpha of perhaps the roughness texture. You could have it as the alpha of that. Or you could combine this texture as the, let's say, the red channel, and you could have the green and the blue channel serve other purposes elsewhere over the texture, because as you can see within Marmoset, you can actually choose the channel here. So you can say which channel of the texture you want to use as the metalness texture. And same thing for the roughness, actually. So both the roughness and the metalness could have easily been combined as to one texture. And I don't know why the data is like that, but that's what we are dealing with today. Okay, it's quickly becoming apparent to me that the lighting scenario within the scene right now isn't really optimal to be able to really read these materials. Everything is kind of white, a little kind of samey in terms of lighting. There really isn't anything that is very, very interesting. So let's go ahead and change that here. Let's build for ourselves a much more interesting lighting setup within Marmoset. So right here, over where my model group is, there is a place here that is called Sky. And in here, we can actually play around with the skybox, and we can change it. We can add lights. We can do a whole bunch of stuff to it. In fact, in here, if I click and drag somewhere, you see that I can actually place what is the equivalent of a directional light within the scene. That's a really great thing to do so that you get lighting that is, as I said, a lot more directional, right? Now we have these shadows here that are getting built. Here, if I right-click on something, I'm going to delete it, right? So this particular light that I've placed here, you can see that now I'm actually starting to get these directional shadows out of that, which is really, really cool. It obviously makes our scene a lot more interesting. It makes our character a lot more interesting. And you have controls here if you want to keep only the directional lights that you have created. And you want to get rid of the ambient light that is coming from the HDR. And right now there is quite a lot of it that is coming from this HDR here. You can certainly reduce here the brightness for the HDR brightness, all the while keeping in mind that the child light brightness is a multiple of this particular value that is here. So we can boost the child light brightness in the other way. And now we're starting to get this lighting that is actually very, very dramatic, very directional, and there's not a lot of ambient light in there. So that's one of the things that we could do. But I'm kind of interested to maybe try different HDR in this particular case. So let's go ahead and do that. There's actually here, if you go to library, either here or presets. Actually, let's try presets. Yeah, see, so when you open the presets here, you actually have a lot of HDRs that have been already created and that you can already use that all look kind of a bit more interesting than the default one that they have. I like some of these here, these Tokyo ones. because they just have this kind of very nice, moody sort of night scene to them that I really like. So let's try this this alley Tokyo one. Let's say just for the sake of it. So you just right click on it. If it doesn't work after you've right click on it again, and then it's probably going to work because sometimes it has to download those and it takes a while. By the way, when you're in Marmoset, if you want to rotate around like this, rotate the HDR around, you simply have to hold Shift and right click within the viewport to rotate the HDR around. And the great thing about that is that will also rotate all the lights that are attached to the HDR itself. So if I select the sky again, and here I can actually go ahead and do the same thing here. I can go in here and I can add a bunch of lights. And you know, what I try to do is to add a few lights that really matches with some of the lights that we can see within the HDR there, just so that the character really sits really well within the environment that we have selected. So let's go ahead here and add a few of those. We can add another one here. I'm kind of searching for the brightest spot in there, as you can see, trying to see, oh, that was pretty good there. Like that is pretty good. We could add one to the back here, perhaps. And that's pretty good, okay. Can rotate around, you can see the lighting, what it looks like right now. At the bottom here where it says backdrop, you can see that right now it's set to ambient sky, which means you're really just getting a very, very blurred value or blurred representation of the HDR itself. You can switch this to whatever you want. You could use sky directly if you want to have the maximum sharpness for the HDR there. So you can really make it look as if the character is really within the environment itself. So that's really, really cool. So you have different options here to play with if you want to change that. And finally, one thing I like to do as well when I'm placing these lights within a scene within Marmoset is to select the lights afterward. And where it says area shape here and the diameter here is set to 0 right now, I like to increase that, okay? If I turn off these lights here, and we just take one as an example. So this, say this one that's here, say this one here. You can see that the shadows here are extremely, extremely sharp. Very, very, very sharp right now. Because the light has no diameter, it's just a punctual point in space. So by boosting this diameter value, I will be blurring the shadows to get these nicer, softer shadows going pretty much everywhere over the character there. So I really like to play around with this value here as well. And so I usually set the value around here. I'm not really too specific with that, but I usually like to set the diameter somewhere around here. It just gives us those nicer, softer shadows pretty much over the whole character. It also changes the specular. If you take a look at the specular here, the size of the specular, could turn these lights on. Can see that the specular also kind of becomes a bit more diffused as you are playing around with the diameter here. So that's another thing to keep in mind. And so that already gives us both an environment and some lights that just makes it a lot more interesting to build these different shaders there. This is actually the HDR I've used previously when working on Tifa. So I actually kind of want to change it for something else just for the sake of it and for the sake of variety. So let's try, let's say, Tokyo Shops, this one here. Let's apply a few lights. This one here, this kind of overhead light that's here. That's kind of cool. Maybe it was this one that I was using before. They kind of look a little bit similar, but nah, let's just keep it for now. Kind of like this one. So let's apply a few of these lights. I don't think there's any limits to how many of these lights you're sort of adding. But I tend to try not to overdo it either. Just add a few and it usually looks pretty good. Let's add one towards the back, in fact, actually. Let me drag and drop this here and try to hit the bright spot over the back there. Oh, that's pretty good right here. Yeah, so that's pretty cool lighting. Same thing here. Let's just set a small diameter to those. There you go. The lighting is very, very bright, but this material is perfectly white right now, so that's kind of it. We'll see how things change as we continue to build these shaders together. Okay, so our surface is already looking a lot more interesting when we're kind of looking at it. For now, I don't think there's really much more to do on this. So let's just leave it like this, and let's continue, and we'll come back, of course, on the shader later if we need to, of course. So the next one here is called main A, so I have a pretty good idea of what texture should go in there. So let's go ahead and do that. So main A, let's drop this within the albedo. Let's drop this. In fact, this is actually the same textures. The gloves here and this main A are actually sharing the same textures, as you can see, because they had broken down the character into multiple shaders, different places to apply different detail maps on different places of the character. And so this is part of the reason why we have multiple shaders that are sharing the same texture sets. So actually, what we can do just to speed up a little bit our workflow here is to simply select this particular material that is here, that we have already kind of customized a few different things. Let's do copy material settings. And then let's take our other shader, right click on it, and let's do a paste material settings. So the reasons why the shirt is in a separate shader than the keep calling these the bracers or whatever. I guess I'll call them sleeves because I'm not sure what else to call them. All right. So the reason why this is in a separate shader than this is really so that we can use a detail map on top of this. Now, Marmoset Toolbag's implementation of detail maps is a bit of a limitation in the sense that by default within Marmoset, you can really only have a detail map that is applied for the normal map, but not necessarily for the albedo. In our shader here, in our main A shader, what we want to do here is to go where it says surface here and where our normal map is currently applied. Where it says here normals, okay, and there's a little arrow that is pointing down, let's click on that and let's select detail normals. And that is what will allow us to use the detail map on top of the normal map. So in this particular case, because we already have a fabric detail map that has been used in Final Fantasy, I have it right here. You can see it's just a small texture really that tiles, and they are using this as a 256. Now, if you're wondering where to get tiling detail maps like these, there's a lot of different places you can grab those. You can grab those off of Substance, Substance Source. In fact, if you have access to Substance legitimately, you have access to the Substance Source library at the same time, which contains like thousands of textures that can be exported out as detail maps like these for, you know, every sort of material you could ever imagine. So that's a great repository of detail maps that you can use. There are often as well detail maps that you can find probably on Gumroad. You can buy those online on different websites. There's a whole lot of places you can acquire detail maps. You can make those using Substance Designer. That's my usual approach because I like to use Substance Designer. But so there's a lot of different places you can acquire this kind of data itself. And so if you're looking for that, it shouldn't be too hard to find online. So here I'm just going to drag and drop this within the detail map slot. And the other thing that we want to do is to use a mask to mask out where the detail map will be applied so that it doesn't wind up being applied everywhere. Now, in this particular case, there may not necessarily be a mask, but we'll see cases where it's very, very useful to have that. So here, we can play with the tiling value here. The offset will just slide it. We'll just slide it along the surface, but in this case, it doesn't really do much for us. And if we flip the Y for the base normal map, we likely want to flip the Y in this case too. And you can see it kind of makes the detail map go from, if the Y is not flipped, from kind of looks, I guess it's kind of hard to see, but it looks like it's kind of insetting the surface as opposed to going on the outside. It's very subtle in this case. For detail map, probably can't tell too much, but because we're flipping the Y for the normal map, the base normal map, I'm highly certain that it needs to be flipped for the detail map too, else they would have engine issues. And so, yeah, so now we have the detail map applied. As I said, it's very, it's possible, not necessarily likely, but possible in this case that there isn't actually a mask for this. Although, we do have a mask, in fact. So there is one, as you can see right here. Just not sure where else the shader is currently applied. Let me see. Oh, okay, so it's applied here too, but I think this may or may not be using the detail map. But in any case, it's very common when you have a detail map to also have a mask of some kind to mask that detail map to only be applied on specific zones of the character, because you may not necessarily want it everywhere. So that's what we have here, our Tifa main A normal map mask, or MN mask, whatever that means. So, of course, if you're texturing character yourself, you can make these masks yourself, of course, for your own character. So let's drag and drop that within the detail map, weight map slot right there. And as I said, I'm not sure. Oh yeah, see? So it's actually removing it from the socks there, but it's not actually removing it from the torso. Of course, here we have a channel selector if we want to perhaps have multiple masks within the same texture so that red, green, and blue have different functionalities. That's a very optimized way to work. But that's kind of it. So I believe this is kind of it for this shader here. Now, one thing we could actually play around with right now, because this shader looks to me like it's really only applied. Is it applied here? Is the shader applied here? Yeah, it is. Okay. Because it looked to me like if the shader was only applied on cloth, we could play around with a cloth shader here to see what kind of result we can get out of that. Maybe we'll do that later. But for now, let's just keep it like this. Or sometimes what I like to do too is to add a little bit of subsurface on cloth. Maybe not necessarily use the cloth shader per se, but add a little bit of subsurface. Why don't we try that here, just for the sake of it? Since we're here, we're sort of exploring things. Also, I think I need to reduce the intensity of some of these lights. You can see it's kind of burning in here a little bit. So let me just reduce the intensity of this light here. Feels a lot better, right? Yeah, so one thing I do like to do with cloth is where it says diffusion here, okay? So within our shader properties, under albedo, where it says diffusion here, it's set to Lambertian right now. You could set it to microfiber if you want to play around with an actual like sort of marmoset implementation of a cloth shader. You can see it kind of adds a bit of a Fresnel effect in different places. I think this is pretty cool, but for me, this microfiber one, I see it as more useful when we're doing things like satin. For me, that's where it becomes a bit more useful. I find that for just normal cloth, I find that it's a little bit overpowering. So in this case here, let's go back to Lambertian. So what I do instead is that instead of using that, what I'll have tendency to do for cloth to make it look a little bit more interesting is to, where it says transmission here instead, to set that so that this is using a little bit of subsurface scattering. And the consequence of that, of course, is that it is flattening out a little bit the lighting over the surface. And by default, the subsurface scattering here, transmission mode, is set to work well for skin. So we do want to change some of these parameters here a little bit. So one thing we can do is where it says scatter map here, we can just copy paste the albedo in there. So let's copy the albedo, let's paste it in here. And finally, where there's a little color swatch here, you can see it's kind of coloring a little bit the surface in different places. If you look here, there's a little bit of a orange tint to it. Let's just put this as white so that we don't wind up having a white subsurface effect there. So the consequence of it is that it is making the normal map a little less readable. It's kind of blurring out the normal map a little bit. But you kind of expect some of that out of cloth, right? You kind of expect to have some of that a little bit there. And we can always play with the scatter depth here, as you can see, until we kind of find just the right spot. Like that for me, that looks pretty good, you know? We can see the detail map in here, but it's also kind of blurry. It's not too harsh on the eyes. I kind of find that interesting. Same thing is going to happen for the socks in this case. And, well, the same thing is going to happen here right now, but that's okay, you know. We could make a separate shader just for the boots if we wanted to get rid of the subsurface effect, but for now it's fine. And finally, we could always remove, of course, the boots from the subsurface scattering effect by making them black within the scatter map, and by, of course, duplicating the scatter map first, because right now it's the same as the albedo texture. Sorry, that's a lot of stuff I'm throwing away, but this is why this is recorded. You can always just pause and re-listen to the same thing again. We do have the parameter again for fuzz, as you can see, or rather, well, what kind of looks like that sheen that we had in the other case here. So that's kind of cool if you can just add a little bit of that in cloth. This, sometimes it's good to turn it on. I'm never really quite sure whether to turn it on or off, but you could mask fuzz with cloth, and it helps to just make your cloth there too just a little bit more, I suppose, a little bit more fuzzy on the extremities. It's kind of subtle, but I typically like it. Kind of makes it look a bit more clothy, so that's kind of cool. Okay, let's move on to the next shader that we have. So the next one that we have here is called main B. So once again, let's start by just plugging in the textures in there, and then we'll see what we want to do with that afterward. So let's take this, let's drag and drop it in here. Here we go. Where's that applied? So this is the belts. It's a lot of the belts, in fact, that we have over the character. And we have a mask here for detail map as well, so that's really, really cool. In this case here, we actually have an ambient occlusion texture, actually, which we did for main A as well, and I wasn't actually using that. So actually, let's go back and let's address that right now. We'll come back to the shader afterward. Okay, so main A here, so the ambient occlusion texture, we want to be plugging that where it says occlusion here at the bottom of our shader. So let's swap this over from occlusion, or rather from none to occlusion mode. And occlusion map, let's drag and drop our texture in there. Now, this is actually kind of interesting. As you can see, we don't actually have the proper mapping, it seems. And for some reason, I don't actually know the reason why, but I think it's just out of trying to be the most optimal they possibly could be. They have actually added, with texture utilization, they have actually added to a lot of these different pieces here, they actually have added a second texture set. In fact, there's even a third texture set, although it seems empty for now. But you can see there's actually a second texture set. So there's two texture sets. Let's say for this part of the character here, we can see that there's two of those. And for a reason that isn't quite clear to me, they have used texture set 2 to bake the ambient occlusion textures. Not quite sure why that's the case, but that's just how it is. And so what we have to do then in our occlusion little shader slot here, we have to make sure here where it says UV set 0 here, we have to make sure to set it to 1 so that the ambient occlusion texture will use the proper UV set that it has been baked for. Let's see if we can see the impact of that in different places here. What about here if we turn this off? Yeah, you can see it's kind of darkening a little bit some of the booth there. So subtle effect, but you know, these things do add up and they do contribute to making something very interesting. For the gloves too, then, therefore, we can also have the ambient occlusion texture in there as well. So on the this particular shader here, let me go down to the occlusion tab. Let me right click on that and say I want to copy the occlusion data. And then afterward, let's go to our first shader using the same textures. And within occlusion, let's paste that data in there. Okay, so coming back to this here. So we have our normal map that is applied here. Let's flip the Y once again. You can see here, the effect is a bit more obvious, I think. There's just something with the way that the light reacts with the surface, right? If we look at this strap here, it just doesn't look quite right. The way the shading is kind of on the surface, it's not looking quite right? So once we flip the normals here, you can see for me, it just looks better. Or this belt here, right? If you kind of take a look at this looks artifacty. It's not like the shading just looks like a little wrong, right? The moment that you flip the Y, now suddenly it looks proper. So that's wonderful. So that's kind of how, you just kind of give that a try and see what happens. Okay, so this is leather, which means that we probably want to be using a leather detail map in different places. But I think we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's finish plugging the other textures that we have actually first. So microsurface roughness, this is where our roughness texture goes. In this case, of course, we have _S textures for some reason. And here we want main B _S. So let's grab that right here, plug that in there. Just for like the main A's, these have been baked out as glossiness textures and not roughness textures. So by inverting our texture, we are converting our glossiness texture into a roughness texture, which is great. And do we have a metalness map as well? We do here. So _m, let's plug that in here. Here too, we want to use the alpha because, yeah, you can see here the metalness map that they have. And you can tell that it's a metalness map because you can see all these different edges in different places that seem to be highlighted, which, you know, kind of corresponds with the places that you would have chipped paint and stuff. So once again, it's a bit of for me, it's kind of confusing why they didn't have in the same texture the metals map, the roughness map. There too, it could be an artifact of extracting this data from a video card. That's possible too, okay? So, because if someone did this on a production, it would be just severely unoptimized work, but it's possible that this is just the data, the way that it has been extracted from the video card, and you know, we don't know what the original data actually looked like that was thrown on the video card. So it's possible that they had combined all of these in the beginning, but now they're not. I don't know. I don't really know. And what else? Yeah, so let's plug our occlusion texture here once more. So set this to occlusion. Let's select our occlusion texture, main P. Plug that in there. Probably the same thing here. Yeah, you can see the occlusion right now. It's kind of in wonky places, right? So let's bake this out to UV or use UV set 1. By the way, if you've never baked in occlusion texture before, it's not necessary to apply this on a separate texture set, of course, or a separate UV set. It's just what they have done here for some reason. Yeah, so this is leather. You can see that some of these surfaces, they're actually quite plain if you look at some of these straps. And that's because in this case too, they have created these detail normals that we can use for leather. So let's go ahead and do that. Swap this over from normals to detail normals. Detail normal map here. Let's plug our leather detail map that we have. Let's plug that into there. You can see it's kind of appearing here. Let's play with the tiling here. Flip the Y. We have a weight map that we can use. So this one here, let's apply that in there. Using the red channel, so that's great. And this will just limit the detail map to only certain places. You can see here how we're getting that leather-ish here that's kind of appearing, you know, which I don't necessarily mind, but looks like still they wanted to, let's say, have only the leather detail map on this zone here of the pouch. So that's why we have that weight map that is there. All right, we may not necessarily want to have subsurface on leather. I mean, we could. That also probably has a very slight subsurfacey effect, but in this case, let's just keep that off for now. And let's move on to the next shader that we have. We'll come back and tweak these if it makes sense to do so. This one here is, not sure where this one here is. In fact, it would maybe make more sense for us to go through, now that I think about it, let's jump through this in a different order, perhaps. Let's just go through this from top to bottom as a list, and because we probably won't wind up using all of these shaders in here. By the way, there are overlapping meshes here within this model, and this is one of those. So actually, let me just hide this, because you can see that I'm hiding it, and the arms are not disappearing because there's actually overlapping geometry here. So actually, let me just disregard this mesh here. The next one that we have here is main C, and those are the actual arms per se that continue under these gloves. So let's apply the texture to those. So let's select those, select the arms, right click on those, and then select material. That's going to bring us to the proper material, which everything is kind of nicely following each other right now. That's wonderful. Okay, now I don't know which texture should go in there. I assume maybe it should be these ones, right? Main C, that makes sense, right? So let's drag and drop that in there. This is normal, flip Y, roughness, invert that. Do we have an ambient occlusion texture for this? We don't. Main C, oh yeah, actually no, we do. Okay, so occlusion, let's apply that in there. Now there too, it seems like there's a separate texture set for the occlusion. Swap that over, that's wonderful. And so of course, this is skin. And so we will want to have a skin shader applied to this. So Marmoset makes it very, very simple. As long as your character is at a proper scale too, I don't have a tendency to play around with those settings a little too much because the default ones, they actually work pretty well. So once again, in our shader where it says transmission, let's set this over to subsurface scattering. Now the lighting is very somewhat diffuse right now, so it may be hard to appreciate exactly the impact of this. By the way, I do have a tendency to copy the albedo texture in here. I'm not sure if this should be using a different color or a different texture entirely. Maybe it should, in fact. But in a lot of cases, it just it works well enough if you don't want to bother having to do a deeper subsurface color texture and stuff like that. Yeah, so of course, the result of this is that it will make the lighting a bit more diffuse over the surface, of course. We could also apply here a detail map, of course, because we have access to one of those. So let's go ahead and do that. By the way, the scatter depth, yeah, you can see it's definitely working, right? And I put the scatter depth super high. This is like kind of I don't know, it's like Jello or something. So let's bring this down to its default value, which was probably 1, I believe. And in here too, we could apply detail normals here and use the skin detail map that they are using here. So there too, that's just a texture once again with like a bunch of, as you can see, a bunch of different skin pores and tiny little wrinkles and stuff. Once again, it's easy to generate one of these or to either find some of these, buy some of these, get some of these from Substance Source, and buy a scan of a face, and then just crop out the little square of it, make it repeat, these sorts of things. It's very, very simple to do these things. So you shouldn't have too much of a hard time finding one of those online if you're looking for one of those. And then let's play with our tiling here. And of course, let's flip this. Flip our Y. Let's play around with this. Get very, very small. And if we wind up feeling that it's a little too strong, it's not uninteresting right now, but it may be a little too strong. We can always, of course, play with the weight of it to reduce its intensity a little bit there. So kind of cool. One thing I do like to do with skin, okay? So this is a neat little trick I'm about to show you. Just to make skin sometimes a little bit more visually kind of interesting. Because, you know, the thing about skin is that it's one of these materials where you have the skin itself, and then on top of the skin, you have a little bit of you often have a little bit of sweat, a little bit of water that's kind of over the skin itself. And so there's actually a very beautiful way in Marmoset to deal with that top layer of sweat, if you will, or just top layer of humidity that you'll get over skin. And that's called the clear coat. So within Marmoset, it's very common for real-time engines to expose a second, what we call a second specular lobe. And that changes name from place to place. But in this particular case, the second specular lobe that we have is called the clear coat. So as I go down the material here, you can see here where it says clear coat reflection, clear coat microsurface, and clear coat reflectivity. Let's just turn all of these on here. Okay, so I'll click the little arrow towards the bottom. For the reflection itself, let's go for GGX. For the microsurface itself, let's just set this to roughness. And finally, reflectivity, let's go for a specular value. So you can see the kind of impact that it has already. It's adding this kind of layer of sheen or this layer of wetness over the whole surface. And so by default, with the default value, it's a little too strong, of course. So let's go ahead and play around with our settings to make that look a little bit more in line with what we would expect there to be. So the control here for the roughness is independent from the control of the roughness of the base skin, of course. This is only for the wet aspect, if you will, or the clear coat. So the sort of humidity on top of the skin there. So we can kind of play around with this here. I like to have this fairly glossy because this is mimicking kind of water a little bit. But then let's play around here and reduce the reflectivity of the surface. It's a little too strong to begin with. So somewhere around there, it's already kind of a bit more interesting. If it still looks too wet, feel free to play with the intensity. Feel free to play with the roughness. One thing we could do is actually make it glossier, but then also make it less intense here, something like that. Maybe that's a little too much, right? Can also play around here the Fresnel, reduce a little bit that Fresnel effect that we have around the edges there, which is a little too strong. So that's not uninteresting. It's kind of happening right now. Let me try still playing around with these values a little bit. See, that's kind of cool too. It's kind of giving a nice effect to the skin. It's very subtle, but it is interesting. And of course, we could have a different roughness for this if we want to have places on the skin that's a little bit more oily, these sorts of things. You know, you're kind of thinking of like a nose or like a forehead. You want to have a bit more oiliness in there. You would have a roughness map here that you would plug within the roughness to control for that. Okay, cool. All right, so we have applied our occlusion. Yeah, I think it's pretty good. Here too, we could play around and have a little bit of peach fuzz if we wanted to. Just give the appearance of that. And yeah, so that's pretty good. Let's move on to the next thing that we have here. Oh, next is the eyes. I'm actually going to keep this for the end, okay? Because we'll be spending the most time on this, so I don't want to get involved with that right now. We'll come back on pretty much everything that is related to the face and the eyes and stuff. Let's finish the rest of the body first. So head. This is skin here as well. The skin texture or the skin material. Within the textures, it is using, I'm looking for skin in here. So it is using, in this case, main B texture here. So let's start, first of all, main B skin. Let's select, first of all, our material. Here it is right here. Okay. Let's take our main B skin material that we have already customized for the rest of the outfit. Let's copy its material settings. Let's go to our skin material. Let's paste the material settings in there. And then what we want to do is to afterward take the this part here, which is applied on the arms, right? And we want to copy these different settings that we have done for the normal map, for the detail normal map, for the subsurface effect. Even though I haven't really tweaked these too much, we can actually just copy paste some of these parameters on top. So where it says transmission here, let me copy transmission data to this one here, transmission. Let's paste that in there. Of course, we have to swap this texture though, because it's not using the proper one. Then we had for the detail maps, we had play around with that a little bit. So it's probably simpler here for me to copy the surface data from our arm texture to our body texture, and then to simply swap back the detail map or the unique texture that is applied. So this would be main B. Just like that. So we can get, well, we'll probably have to play with the size of these details. This is set to 40 and it still looks like it's a bit too big for me. So let's set this manually to, I don't know, 64 or something. Yeah, it's looking good. It's looking good to me. Yeah, and we can, of course, add more weight, a bit less weight. Somewhere around there seems, that seems pretty good to me. Let's try the fuzz, a bit more fuzz. Maybe not too much of that, right? But a little bit of it is interesting. Okay, next we have mouth. We'll keep that for the end as well. Earrings, okay. Let's find where that texture is. First, let's select the material of this. This one here, okay. For this, let's just copy paste. So it's probably either main A or main B that's used in there. So let's just copy material settings and see what happens. They have these meshes that are these environment meshes that are probably using so that they have a specific cube map that is reflected on some of these surfaces. In our case, we can't really use that, so we won't really try, but it's part of the reason I'm sure why this isn't actually seeming to have an effect here. So anything that says environment here, I'm just going to turn them off, really. Oh yeah, here we go, right? All right. Well, that looks pretty good already, right? Not sure there's much that we need to tweak here. I mean, if we wanted to be fancy, perhaps we could, one thing we could do is maybe play around with, where it says clear coat reflection here, we could play around with Newton's rings. That's if you want to give a bit of an iridescent effect to something, you can see the kind of effect that it's creating here. And then let's play around with these settings here. Yeah, that's kind of cool, right? The kind of effect it's kind of giving over a surface. I don't know that she has that really, but within the game. But it's kind of cute, so why not keep it here? Since the earrings are on a separate shader, we may as well just have that. You can see it's kind of giving that, like these Newton rings here, it's mimicking the like having a thin material or a thin translucent material of some kind. So, you know, like metal that has a very thin layer of oil on top of it. That's kind of what this looks like here, right? So that's the kind of effect that it does. When we have like very, very thin material, sometimes they will, the way that light goes in and bounces out, it creates all these kind of weird colors. Anyway, I just think it looks kind of cute, so let's go for that. Oh, by the way, all of this is actually done with an alpha. Actually, we should probably fix this here. You can see like these, all these little rings are actually an alpha texture, so let's go ahead. We need to plug that in there, of course. So in this case here, what we want is to go down where it says transparency here. And we want to set this to cutout. Ditter is good for things like hair, but when we want things that are cut out in a very hard way, if you will, well, that's where cutout becomes important. So let's set this up here, cutout. And you can see here that there we go, because by default, the cutout is actually using the albedo alpha. And it just so happens that within their albedo texture, they have the alpha channel for the transparency of some of these meshes that are in there. So that all works pretty nicely just by default. Oh, the little material balls that we have here. Okay, so for these, now when I was talking about cube maps, this is kind of what I mean. Like in the game, they're actually using these kind of noisy, sort of cloudy kind of maps to probably act as a reflection layer. So as opposed to always reflect the environment itself, they're always just reflecting this particular texture. And so they're kind of using these. So in our case, we won't be using those since we can't plug an environment texture on shaders directly in Marmoset. So as opposed to use these, we'll just have a bit more fun with these. I figured since these are actually, if we kind of look at it, right, they've actually made so that the inside of this is actually visible, so that if you're not using any materials, you still at least see the inside and it's not just a gaping hole there. So in our case, why don't we have a little bit of fun with refraction and stuff like that within Marmoset to really get some really beautiful shader balls going on here. So let's actually do that. So let's take our material A here and let's once again here select the material that is applied on it. And this one here, right? And so, yeah, let's just have a little bit of fun with this then. So we don't need to apply an albedo in here. We don't need to apply, probably not need to apply roughness. But I would like to do is where it says transmission. Let's set this so that it is using refraction, in fact. And look at that. So now it kind of looks like a piece of metal actually, but if we actually play, this is actually kind of refractive, so you can kind of see a little bit the inside there. And the inside of this is actually controlled, or the blurriness of the refraction that you're going to get is actually controlled by the roughness of the surface, actually, believe it or not. So as you can see, as I'm playing around with the surface here and making it very, very glossy, now this is really starting to look like a piece of glass that isn't there. Yeah, that's kind of cool, right? And for the tint here, we can tint this, let's say, red. Now we're getting this kind of beautiful kind of glass ball that isn't there. And there too, actually, so one thing that we can do that's kind of interesting is here too, to set the roughness here relatively high so we get these kind of somewhat blurry kind of refraction in there, right? The way that the light reacts, we don't clearly see through this as if it's a piece of glass, or rather it's kind of like a frosted piece of glass in a way. But then on top of this, and we can play with some of these settings, but I don't know that they'll necessarily change much in our case here. And then what we could do on top of this afterward is maybe in here, like let's reduce the reflection of it, because the reflection right now, they are blurry too. They're a little bit strong to me. So where it says reflectivity here, it's set to metalness right now. Let's set this to specular, okay? Which will allow us to actually reduce the specularity of the surface, as you can see. But instead, what I want to do, let's add a clear coat on top of this, just like we did for skin. So let's set this to GGX. Let's set the microsurface to roughness. Let's set the reflectivity to specular or roughness, something. Specular, there you go. And now we can play around with the roughness of the clear coat and make that one very, very, very glossy. And we can play around here with the intensity. If these specular highlights are a little too big, well, we can always just control the size, the diameters of our lights here to begin with. Maybe reduce those a little bit. And there you go. We could continue playing around with this as much as we want, of course. But for now, let's just copy this here. So copy material settings. This is probably the shader ball applied on this one here. So let's paste that in there. And here we go. And let's change the color here to something else. So there you go. Two materials. I don't quite remember what these colors represent in the game, but that's what she has. So for the for the hair, we have here, let's select our hair, select the material itself. Let's apply our hair texture in there. Where do we have it here? So we have our textures here, right? So let's apply our diffuse and albedo. Let's apply our normal map in here. Flip that. Hair AO, that's going to be an interesting one. Let's keep that one for just a minute. Hair specular, it's what I'm looking for. Invert that again. All right. Transparency, let's set this to dither in this case. She looks like she's kind of missing a little bit of hair over the top of the head, right? We'll fix that. Okay, we have an occlusion texture. We might as well set it right now. So occlusion, let's set the texture in there. So as we had seen, same thing for cloud. So the occlusion texture, if we just go through this as a refresher there, the way that they're baking here is that they have an occlusion texture that is applied on their second UV set. So if we look at the hair and we select it, right? For our first UV set, we have the tiling textures that are for the hair strands, right? So this that kind of looks like this, with every individual clump of hair that is there, and then all these different planes used for the hair are all overlapping, of course. But then they have this second UV set that is only applied, as you can see, on, or rather, so in the second UV set, well, what we have is that every plane of the head is uniquely unwrapped in this. And so, although UV set 1 is the one that is that has the albedo, that has the alpha, that has the normal map for the hair, and they're all kind of more or less, all of these hair planes are all more or less sharing the same texture. For UV2, each plane is unique, and therefore it is free to use a unique texture. And in this case, that unique texture would be the ambient occlusion texture. that we have here. And that allows for every clump of hair, for every hair plane that we have, to have a separate shadow, a separate ambient occlusion shadow that has been baked for it. Now, I'm not sure in this case that that's necessarily going to do all that much because her hair is very dark, but here we can still give it a try. So this is with that occlusion texture. And turning this off here. Yeah, you can see it's kind of making some of the hair a little bit darker, but it's not very obvious. Could always put this here to 10 and see what happens. Oh yeah, you can see here it's way more obvious the kind of effect that it has. It's probably too much. I'm not sure I want to keep that up to 10, but at least you can kind of see the kind of effect that it has. All right, let's set this back to 1. Maybe 2 would be nice. Yeah, see how it's kind of nicely giving it a lot of nice volume and depth. That's really, really cool. I really love this. I love this approach. So for the face, let's look at the face and then we'll keep the eyes for last, really. So for the face itself, we can just select it here. I could do the same thing and start with the same parameters that I have applied on the body. So that would be this one, I believe. Let's copy material settings. Select the material of the face. Let's paste that in there. She looks like she's had better days right now. And let's just apply these textures at the proper location. That's good. Face normal map here. Copy texture, paste it there. Let's make sure we have replaced all of these textures. So roughness texture here. There's probably no metalness texture for this. It's unnecessary. Occlusion. Which I'm not sure that we necessarily have one for the face, in fact. Oh yeah, we do. So head AO here. Let's apply that in there. It's probably using UV set 0, so let's use that. And as you can see, so we do have a mask here for the subsurface scattering effect. So that the subsurface scattering effect isn't applied everywhere equally. Right now it's also looking a little too wet, but these things take time to tweak and get them to look really, really great. So although we don't have our clear coat here, so I'm not sure what I have actually really started with here, if I've started from the proper thing, but regardless. So let's apply our subsurface mask in here. The result of which we're getting a bit less specular in different places. Like we're not getting any on the lips here. I'm not sure how much I really like that, to be honest, but it's what it is. I mean, probably would want some specular over the lips, right? Oh, some subsurface over the lips. But still, for now, it's fine. Although, one thing I do like about this texture, though, that we can actually definitely use is the fact that the lips are dark, and so are the eyes and the eyebrows. So those actually coincide with the places that we probably don't want to have the skin detail map that is kind of applied. So we can actually reuse this texture within the detail weight map to remove the detail map from the lips. So that's kind of cool. All right, so let's tweak these settings as well as we can. First, let's reduce the tiling here. Oh yeah, it's a lot better. And put the weight here at 100%. Good tiling detail map. All right, let's take a look at those specular settings. Set this here to specular. Our reflectivity, that's set to metalness so that we can have access to... This probably shouldn't be using a texture right now, though. Let me just reset these settings. So these are the default reflectivity settings that we have within Marmoset. It's a little too juicy in different places. So let's address that. Okay, so for me the roughness is a little too strong. Or rather, it's a little too glossy, I find. I don't necessarily hate it here though, but I'm not convinced about the roughness everywhere over the face right now. It looks a little too glossy to me right now. So let's find a way to reduce that. So, oh yeah, I can just reduce this setting here, and it's actually looking pretty good. So I'm happy with that. Okay, this is another one of those places where we may want to play around a little bit with that clear coat. So let's do that. Although before I do that, I'm kind of feeling the need to start playing around with the parameters within this scene as well, the rendering parameters. So let's put the skin shader on hold. I just want to talk a little bit about more the rendering parameters that we have within the scene, and see what can we tweak in the scene to start to get just a better rendering out of all of this here. So here on the left completely, I'll select my main camera that is within the scene. And let's go to the bottom of this here. And a few things that I like to tweak. Okay, first of all is the tone mapping. That's really, really cool to play around with that. So where it says linear here, let's set this over to one I particularly like to use is Reinhardt, actually. And no, not the kind of Reinhardt you'd be thinking about right now. But you can see the kind of effect that it does. It just sort of makes the lighting, it reduces the contrast within the lighting, and it helps to also kind of avoid having places where the surface is getting kind of a little bit burnt in. So personally, I really like to use Reinhardt. I just like the kind of effect that it does. I don't have a tendency to tweak these settings too much. I find that the moment that you just change a little bit this value exposure here, it just starts to not look as interesting, I suppose. So that's the first thing I want to do. So for the tone mapping itself, you could play around too, of course. Like they're all kind of interesting in different contexts. But in this case here, Reinhardt is certainly my favorite one to use. We could add a little bit of bloom, just the smidge of it, so that it's almost imperceptible. But if I turn it off, you can see that it kind of disappears here. So it just adds just a little bit of a glow around the highlights. It's kind of nice to have. I think that's it for here. Let's go within our render parameters that is up here. And this is more for the technical parameters that are within the scene, like where you can control the shadows, where you can control stuff like that. If you have a ray tracing capable video card, you can turn that on. Really makes surfaces look really, really good usually. Although, wait up, I think that's the ambient occlusion texture that's kind of screwing up there. There may be a bug with ray tracing too, because we don't have that bug here if we are not using ray tracing. It could be a ray tracing bug, I'm not sure. Maybe the ray tracing doesn't like AO on second UV sets. Although it works for the hair though. I'm not sure how to explain this, to be honest, but well, we're not going to use ray tracing today. So, but if you wanted to, this is where you would have the control. Regardless, I came here actually mostly to play around here with the shadow quality, and I wanted to maybe set this from high to mega, and then maybe even use the cascade effect. And it just gives shadows that are just slightly higher quality, I find. Although sometimes the cascade can create other bugs too. But for now, I think it looks pretty good. So I kind of like it here. So let's keep it like this. Sometimes reducing this kind of leads to better result. When you zoom out of a character, playing around this cascade distance here. But regardless, for now, that's fine. A bit of ambient occlusion in the scene, why not? It's kind of cute, I like it. And local reflections, very, very good. So that's these local reflections are gonna fix this kind of problem here where you're kind of getting a bit of specular on the lip because it's kind of catching a light that's behind the character. So turning on local reflections, well, it should should have changed this. Well, it does have a minor impact. We can see it's definitely working, but I guess it's not quite clearing this out the way that I kind of wanted it to. So I guess we'll just keep it like this for now. Let's just continue, and we'll continue playing around with these settings as it makes sense to do so. Okay, so back to the skin. What I wanted to do on the skin was to play around with that second lobe, once again, that second specular lobe. So clear coat reflection, GGX, clear coat micro surface. Let's set this to roughness, and finally our reflectivity to specular. Now the question that I have is, could I use the roughness texture already for the clear coat? Maybe to have a bit more specularity here. I think that could work, right? I think we could probably use this. We could make a separate texture for this, of course, for the clear coat. But let's use this here. So this texture, let's apply this within our clear coat microsurface, and let's invert this. Actually, let me turn that off for now. I'm kind of curious to kind of play around with this. Yeah, take a look at the lips, right? How nice and glossy these are right now. But we definitely don't want this to be glossy elsewhere. So I could definitely create a mask for this. I guess we could try to do it quickly. Could try to make one together. Because I definitely like the kind of effect that we're getting here, but I don't want this everywhere. Because it just looks like she's been sweating quite a lot, right? So elsewhere, I'll want a roughness that's pretty clear coat. It's much higher, probably somewhere around here, which is very, 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 very dark. Okay, so let's take this texture here. This should be fairly quick to do. Let's take this texture here. Let's save this out, first of all. We'll save this out as Tifa head. Let's say we'll call it clear coat S. And then here, let me just create a new texture, make it, rather a new layer. Let's make it completely black. Let's reduce this to like 90% or so. And let's just make a mask here. A little bit on the forehead. Maybe a little bit on the chin. Certainly a lot over the lips. This is a roughness texture, but because it's getting inverted, this gets converted to a glossiness texture. So this is actually a glossiness texture or rather, this is a glossiness texture that gets inverted to a roughness texture. So, because so the brighter parts are going to be glossier in the end. And yeah, we could try. Maybe we could try a bit on the cheeks, right? Maybe not as much as this. I feel as if it's probably too strong elsewhere too, but let's just maybe just a tiny smidge. All right, it's kind of subtle right now. I'm not sure we're seeing much in here. Let me put a levels on top of this. And here we go. So we're starting to get some really nice glossy lips in here. And maybe a little bit more on this zone of the face. Yeah, so you can see the nose, how it's starting to just reflect light a little bit too, a little bit more. And over the cheeks too. We're probably not going to see much of the forehead, but that's fine. Yeah, so this Starting to kind of like this. Okay, let's keep this like this for now. Let's move on to the rest. Oh, so for the hair, what we could also do for the hair is to play around. So right now the hair really isn't reflecting that much light. It's not that interesting, visually speaking. So one thing we could do for the hair is to play around. Maybe we could add a clear coat to this. But first of all, what I want to do is where it says reflection here, set to GGX. Let's try an anisotropic reflection. And that should be a lot more interesting. That should give us more of a kind of nice anisotropic just effect to some of the hair, you know, some of those longer elongated highlights there. So let's play around with this here a little bit. Reflection, anisotropic. The direction, let's play around with this. Yeah, I'm kind of looking kind of about here. So just about 90, right? As of not too far from that. And then let me just play around these values. Could make this even more anisotropic. It's a little too much, right? This is a roughness texture. Let's set it to a gloss instead. Oh yeah, that's nice, right? That's getting pretty interesting. I like this. Okay, let's keep it like this for now. Actually, no, one thing we could do is, yeah, look at this. This here. This is really, really cool. One thing we could actually do is we could add a bit of Fresnel effect to this. So our reflectivity here doesn't need to be metalness. Set it to either specular or, well, what's an advanced metalness, in fact? Let me explore that. There's a specular map. No, okay, let's just set it to specular. I just want to play around this Fresnel here effect and get a bit of a Fresnel near the bottom of the hair, as you can see. It's subtle, but I kind of like it. Oh, and here too, it's kind of adding these nice little highlights here, as you can see. It's kind of cool, right? Okay, cool. All right, so that's for our hair. Hair's looking really, really good. We could, let's put the eyebrows next, or the eyelashes, and then the eyebrows. Actually, I think it's the same hair shader that is applied on the eyebrows. Yes, it is. There you go. Let's look at the eyelashes. So here, let's set the color, somewhat dark. Let's play around with the roughness. Make those relatively rough. All right, looking pretty good so far. And so let's talk about the eyes then. That's a big topic. Eyes are always very involved. So let's have some fun with those. Okay, so what do we have here? So first of all, we have a few layers here. So let's go through what we have as far as shells within Marmoset. So first we have eyeshadow here. We have eye environment layer. And then we have the eyes proper here, right? Okay, so let's start with the eye 0 here. So this is the, as we've talked about in the case of cloud, you don't need to necessarily have, in this case, to have 3 layers of geometry. In the case of cloud, I remember there were 4 actually, but in Tifa's case, there's actually only 3 layers of geometry. You don't need to have 3 layers of geometry. It's not, not necessary. Sometimes you may even have only 2. Maybe you only want to have 1. There's a lot of different ways to create a lot of these details that we'll be talking about. But in this particular case, they have decided to go for 3. And we can actually use these 3 layers independently to create different effects, of course. So I actually kind of like having 3 layers. I kind of like the effect that it's going to give. But you could combine all of these within one big shader if you wanted to. Anyway, so for our eye here, so the eye, this is the layer of the eyes that is the deepest in our 3 layers. So they're all very, very closely stacked. That's why you're not seeing much of a volume change when I turn some of these on and off. But so for this eye layer here that we have, so let's select the material. And we have the albedo here for that. Let's drop that in there. Let's drop the normal map. For the eye in here, let's flip Y. What else do we have? We have a specular here. Or a gloss texture, in fact. We don't have any. That's it, in fact. That's all that they have given us. Okay. Yeah, so just like that, right? The eyes are not all that interesting right now. She looks kind of like she's wearing contact lenses right now. This is something that bothers me when I watch movies all the time, and they have contact lenses on the actors because they couldn't either afford to do the CGI to replace those with non-contact lenses, or for some reason they just couldn't do it. It's kind of always kind of bothers me, that kind of effect of the eyes kind of like feeling as if the iris is kind of bulging out of the face. It really, really bothers me. So we'll have to correct for that. Before we do that, let's just go through the different layers that we have of geometry, and let's just build this up as much as we can together, and then we'll tweak the data into whichever way that we need to tweak it. So in terms of order, the next mesh in the list here would be, actually, before I do that, let me take my main camera here and just reduce my field of view just a little bit. Just to flatten that out here a little bit. So somewhere around like 27, 30 or so. Looks pretty good. Okay. So the next layer we have, next layer geometry that we have is our eye shadow here. Let's take that. And so on this would go our eyeshadow, which is just a fake shadow because you can't really trust real-time engines to do that well enough. And so what that usually is just is usually just an alpha texture and some type of just diffuse color applied in the albedo map or something. So in this case here, so we have eyeshadow here _D. Let's plug that into our albedo map. And if we look here, what they have, well, they pretty much just have a black texture, but there is an alpha. And the alpha is actually corresponds with both of these eyes that we have. So, yeah. So what we want to do here is to go to our transparency, and we'll set this to dither, so that it is using the albedo alpha. And yeah, so you can see the kind of effect, right? If I turn this on and off, it's kind of adding a little bit of shadow around the lids themselves, a little bit here on top. So it just helps to make the eyes sit a little bit better within the eyelids there. It's unclear whether I truly like this or not in this case here. In fact, well, let's just keep it on for now. But maybe we'll keep it, we'll turn it off later, because Marmoset is a pretty good renderer, and it does a very, very good job. You don't always necessarily need an eyeshadow when you're using Marmoset Toolbag, because it is ultimately a quote unquote better renderer than something like Unreal is, although it's obviously more expensive. So it's kind of in between a real-time renderer and an offline renderer, which is what I really like about it. Anyway, so that's our eyeshadow. There's not much else to say about that for now. I think we could certainly make the where it says reflection here, so that we don't wind up having reflections on top of it, because now this is actually reflected on the eyeshadow itself. We can simply kill the reflection completely. So where it says reflection GGX here, let's just set this to none. And we're going to get rid of the reflection on the eyeshadow itself. We may not want the eyeshadow itself either to cast any shadows within the scene. So let's turn this off here, cast shadow, so that it doesn't cast any shadows at all. Okay, and then on top of that, we have our eye environment layer, or here what they call IN. So it's just the topmost geometry layer in our 3 geometry layer sandwich. That's the topmost one that we have. And so this will be the one that will be responsible for catching a nice reflectivity over the eye there. That's going to be the one that's going to be responsible for that. So let's go ahead here and play around with that here a little bit. Okay, so eye environment here. So what we want to do is to try playing around here with a refractive material property. So where it says transmission here, let's set this to refraction. Let's make this very, very glossy. Because we can't plug an environment map within the shader here, we have to simply control as best as we can the shader that is applied over what is the cornea right now. And I think I'll just start calling it that. I'll just start calling the environment mesh here. I'll start calling that the cornea. So we have ourselves to start to play around with that shader and try to get it to look as best as we can and try to avoid kind of like nasty sort of stretchy reflections like these. So let's talk about all of these. There's a lot of stuff here that we need to talk about. So let's go through all these different layers in no particular order because we have things to tweak on all of these layers, I feel like. Although one thing I probably want to do before going forward is to also on the cornea here to also make it so that it is not casting any shadows. Okay, so what can we do for this? Well, the first thing I want to do is to go back to that eye shader and first of all give it a little bit of subsurface scattering, first of all, so that it's kind of mimicking what's happening on the skin. So let's do that. It's already kind of making it blend a little bit better, I feel like, with the rest of the face, so that's great. We could take this and duplicate it here once again within our scatter map. I said I'm not quite sure if that's okay, if that's how you're supposed to technically use the shader, but I find as if sometimes it looks pretty good to do that. Although in this case, I'm not sure. I'm kind of like what's happening here. Okay, let's keep this off for now. This texture within the scatter map. Okay, and then I definitely want to address as soon as possible the contact lens effect that we're getting here, because I really don't like that. Just this really kind of contact lens kind of effect. It's kind of weird, right? So that's coming from the fact that the geometry for the eye itself doesn't have any kind of concavity, or at least at a minimum, any kind of flatness for the where the iris is. So that's not in the geometry. So I could either tweak the geometry to make to fix that, or I could push the iris in using a displacement map, which is actually what we're going to do. So what we want to do is to use displacement map over the mesh of the for the eyeball itself to push in the iris itself. So here in displacement, we want to use displacement map, of course. This will be a height map. It's not much of any other choice, really. And so we need a displacement map, of course. So within the displacement map, we can create that pretty easily here just by taking the eye texture. And what we essentially want is to push in the part of the iris. Now, we want to do a soft push on that in the sense that because the iris is being convex right now, we want to bring the iris to be concave. So I can't just go in here and start painting black and call it a day, really. We'll have to be a bit more clever than that. So first of all, we need a color for the rest of the eye that will be of a 0.5 intensity. Or in our case, it would be either 128. 128. And anything within a displacement map that is set to 128 will stay at the same level. It's not going to go in. It's not going to go out. And then what I want here is to simply create, maybe use a harder brush than this. Just darken the center of this texture here so that this part of the eye gets pushed inward. So that could be good. This could be maybe a little too black right now, but let's just save this out. Let's give this a try and see where this brings us. This would be a Tifa eye displacement. let's go in here within our displacement map. Let's plug that in there. You can see that already the kind of effect that it's creating, right? Here, if I play around with the scale value, you can see the kind of effect that it does. You can go really far with this if you want. So the kind of effect that it does, that it's really pushing in, as you can see, the iris. Now, so this is what I was afraid of. I don't really like the curve that we're getting here, and that's, once again, because the center of this is actually too opaque dark. So actually, let me create this again. And actually reduce the hardness of my brush. Maybe I could try something where I lower the opacity of this, and then I add something like that on top. Just gotta play around with this until you get the exact result that you're looking for, really. How about this here? All right, this doesn't look too different. One thing I also want to do on this eye right now is probably to subdivide it, in fact. Although right now it's subdividing the eye environment layer, but I think that's okay too. So I0 here. Oh yeah, see, that already looks a little bit better. Just going to give it a little bit more geometry to play with. But now I definitely still want to push in the center here a bit more than that. Oh, that's looking pretty good right now. See how nice and flat that is now? That's really, really cool. All right. What if I turned on this generate normals? Oh yeah, that's nice, right? Obviously now the problem is we're kind of having, well, there's actually two problems in here, okay? So first of all, maybe I don't like this generate normals thing after all. So first problem is that this is contracting the iris too. So we need to, or the pupil, we need to fix that. That's not desired in this case. So we need to fix that. But second of all, I actually kind of don't necessarily want to push in too far in, actually, because if you look at a lot of people's eyes, when you look at them from profile, you sometimes get this effect where from profile, actually, you can actually kind of tell a little bit that the iris isn't actually, it's not necessarily concave. There's a bit of a convexity to it, and especially the refraction created by the cornea. Sometimes you get this effect. Let's just bring up a picture of this. So like, let's say iris profile close-up, maybe? Yeah, like you actually get this effect sometimes. See, from like profile, you can actually kind of see a little bit. A bit of a, like, I think this is actually coming from the refraction from the cornea, although I'm not completely sure, but you can see how you can kind of see a little bit the inside of the pupil, even though you're kind of looking at the eye from the profile. You know, it's kind of a weird effect, but it's an interesting one for sure. So let's see if we can actually get this kind of effect here. So I don't necessarily want to push this in too far. Like this, I don't necessarily want this. So I actually kind of want to keep a little bit of this here, maybe like that. But I still want to get a concavity going on. I still want to get the impression that the iris is very concave, and I'm definitely not getting this right now. So it's better than what we had before, but it still isn't quite really what I want, really. So at this point, we probably just have to tweak the normal map itself. And in fact, there really isn't much happening on the normal map of the eyes. This is very, very boring. But so we essentially have to make the concavity within the normal map of the eye, because I really want the irises to look kind of concave a little bit. So So let's play around with that. And then we also need to fix the problem that we said about the pupil being too small right here. Let's come back on the pupil being too small. So for me, the solution is to take the texture of the eye, and then in here, just add a sphere that will kind of make the iris a lot more concave than what we have. So I do happen to have a texture right for this purpose. Let me just open this. I just grabbed this over the internet. I just typed in sphere normal map, and that's kind of what it came up there. So you can find this very easily. So, okay, let's apply this here. Then let's scale this down. Or rather, let me just, it's kind of hard to see where the iris is right now, right? Let's also put this in here. Just want to see where the iris is, really. All right, that's kind of good. Let's give it a bit of a blur. I also kind of want to get rid of that here. Let's give this a bit of a blur. So filter, blur. Let's do a Gaussian blur. All right, it's looking good. Let's put this as overlay. And I'm not sure whether the X and the Y are in the proper orientation right now, so I guess we'll just have to figure that out as we go. So let's save this out. The PSD, that's okay. Let's go back in here, then our normal map here. Let's select our exported PSD for the eyes, this one here. Let's flip the red channel. Maybe that's not in the proper orientation. In fact, let's flip both the red and the green. Oh yeah, that looks good. So just to test it out, if I have, let's say, a light that's coming from here. Yeah, see, so we're getting this here to be bright, but this is not right now. Okay, now the question is this strong enough, in fact? What happened if I doubled this? I'm kind of curious. I don't really hate it. I don't hate the effect that we're getting right now. Oh yeah, if I really wanted to test this out, I could kill the brightness here for the environment and boost only the child light. Oh yeah, see? I really like this here. So the light is coming from here, but this is part of the character that is, or part of the eye that is bright right now. Really like this kind of effect. Makes the eyes look really, really good. Kind of like this more dramatic lighting, in fact. So let's keep the, maybe I still want to have a bit more of that ambient reflection or ambient lighting, but not as much as what we had before. Cool, okay. All right, what else should we do about these eyes? Well, there's a few things. Okay, first of all, I really dislike these huge reflections we're getting here. I really, really dislike that. It's really, really ugly to me. So I think I want to mask out the reflections that aren't actually happening over the cornea part. I think I just want to get rid of all of that. So for that, I think we can just create a mask for that. Black here, and here we want this to be white. And we want to load this within our roughness map. Not the roughness map, actually, sorry. Let's get rid of that. Within our reflection, reflectivity here, so specular map. Let's plug that in there. So these values are 0.04 to, by default. That's it. Oh yeah, here we go, okay. All right, not quite over the border where I would like to be. Could maybe just play around with the levels on top of that. How about this? Yeah, it's looking better, right? Starting to look pretty good. Maybe there's a bit more we can do on these. Let's see. Somehow, I would like to get more of that nice kind of refraction aspect that we kind of saw over that reference there. I kind of really like that. So maybe there's still a bit more we can do with this to kind of get a bit closer to that. One thing I could actually explore would be to, let me save this, by the way. It's important, right, to save our stuff at some point. So this would be Tifa number 2. One thing I could maybe do with these is maybe try playing around with the parallax here. So what the parallax does that it pushes a surface in as a shading trick, but not necessarily as displacement map. It kind of gives you the sort of illusion that something is getting pushed in the surface, but it's really just and that's just a shader trick. It's not actually moving the geometry around, but sometimes it can kind of give like interesting effects. Yeah, see kind of this may be the parallax that we're kind of getting here. Yeah, see this kind of effect here. Yeah, so there's something kind of interesting here. I'm not even like, you're supposed to use a height map in this, but for some reason it's like just working already kind of interesting, just like that. It's like, okay, cool. Actually, what happened if I had this set to 0? What if I had this displacement map within our height map for the parallax? Yeah, that's kind of interesting too. Yeah, see, we're getting that effect right there. Oh, that's so good. Take a look at that. That's so cool. Sort of effect here. Oh, I love that. Yeah, see this sort of effect. So that's parallax right there. And we're really starting to get that nice effect of the eye that's kind of looking like this. Oh, this is super exciting. I love it. Okay. All right. So what have we not talked about? So first of all, these lights here, maybe they're a little too... I think it's this light here specifically. I think I want to bring the diameter of this down. Yeah, it's better like this. It's kind of smaller reflections there. So we talked about making the iris bigger. That's very simple. We really just have to tweak that in Photoshop. So let's bring the eye diffuse texture. So let's press L, scale this up, maybe like this. Yeah, that works well enough, right? Probably don't have to overcomplicate our life. Let's save this out. PSD. Let's go in here. Let's plug this texture in there. That looks better, right? Yeah, I think that looks better. Yeah, I love these eyes like this. This is really, really cool. Okay. So, oh, that's bad though. So where is that coming from? I thought we got rid of that. Is that on the, well, we're going to get to the bottom of this. Because if I'm having this problem, you may get this problem, and I want to figure out the solution to this problem. So let's get to the bottom of this. Okay, so if I hide the eye again, so the eye, let's hide this. reflection. What if I don't have a specular texture here? What if I play around with this here? So even if I kill here the intensity completely, we are still getting some specular over this surface, which really doesn't make much sense to me. If we kill the reflections completely, then it disappears. Oh, it's the Fresnel effect. Here we go. We found it. We found it. Okay. I told you we were going to get to the bottom of this, and we have. So it's the Fresnel here that adds a little bit of reflectivity around the parts of the model that are at the grazing angle. So here we go. Okay. Whew. All right. I hate not understanding things, but here we go. So Fresnel here. Let's get rid of that. Okay. This was 0.04 by default. Let's put that back on. Let's turn our texture back on. Yeah, okay. Let's turn our eyes back on. Beautiful. Look at that parallax again. I just love it. I love the effect that it does. Oh, it's so crazy good. Okay. Okay. What else can we do on this? So I'm really not convinced that I like the fact that there really is no subsurface effect that's kind of happening here around the lips. I'm really not sure that I like that, personally speaking. So I wonder if I wouldn't completely kill this this mask here that is used. And you can see it just makes the lips blend together a little bit better when we do that. So I kind of like that effect. Yeah, I definitely like to just get rid of this mask here. Now, it's good to have this mask. We probably don't want to have too much of that subsurface effect happening around the here. And for some reason, too, the eyebrows, they look like they're kind of a little bit offset. Let me move them down a little bit. So let's go to minus 0.1, maybe. Yeah, it looks like that fits better to me, maybe 0.05. Not sure what's going on there. But yeah, so I'm not sure that I necessarily like to have this right now, so I kind of want to get rid of it now. As I said, it makes sense to have zones in here that are a bit darker, like the hair, these sorts of things. But in our case, you know what? I'm not really convinced by it, so let's just get rid of it instead of trying to tweak it. Let's try a different lighting scenario. I'm kind of tired of looking at it within this particular lighting scenario. Okay, so let's go here. Presets. Let's try. Which one is this here? This is Alley Tokyo Residential. Let's try this one again. All right, it's looking pretty good. I like this one, I think. Looks like there's a light here. Let's try to grab it. So, oh, here we go. Perfect. All right. What about this one here? I like this one. Let's grab maybe this one. Okay. That's 3 lights. That's good enough. So obviously, if you configure your shader properties, if you configure your shaders properly, they should look good no matter which lighting scenario you are in, of course. And here we could do the thing here too, where we reduce the brightness of the scene, but increase the child light brightness. And we can control the brightness of these lights individually afterward within their settings. Let's make these diameters a bit bigger. All right, so let's talk about how can we make a nice little lighting scenario for us, for our character. Now, we're going to keep this very simple, okay? Because for the most part, I mean, the lighting and pretty much everything should do the job. But we can talk a little bit about what else we could do in here. So, by the way, these kind of shadows here, that's kind of very ugly. I believe that comes from these cascades here. You can see here as I play around with distance. kind of seems to change a little bit. We get rid of the cascades here. We're actually fixing that problem. But sometimes those cascades, they look better. Like, you can see they kind of give us like sharper details here around the shadows of the face. Kind of address to a little bit the kind of ugliness that's kind of happening here with the subsurface scattering. So, you know, it's good to use these cascades if you're going to do a close-up, but if you're far, you can see it kind of starts to create these kind of issues with some of the polygons left and right that don't look all that great. So maybe turn that off for renderings when you're a bit further from the character. But if you're very close, then I do like those cascades. That's looking pretty good, right? Okay, so yeah. We can just keep this relatively simple, okay? This isn't a class on, let's say, compositing per se, but maybe we can just run through a little bit. What can we do on top of this now to just render this out if we want to do a portrait for our portfolio or something? You know, what I would do is if we wanted to just render this out within Marmoset itself, we could continue to play around with some of the settings, of course. So one thing I like to do is to either blur this background completely, because you may actually kind of like to have the background that is very, very sharp and very visible, but personally speaking, I don't necessarily always really like it. So there's really two things we can do. One is that we can play around with the settings within the Marmoset scene to blur it out completely and still just kind of use that with us, or we could just get rid of it completely and do the rest within Photoshop, let's say. So if we want to actually tweak the background itself and make it blurry, so once again here, we go to backdrop here, and we just use either blurred sky or an ambient sky. But in both cases, you can kind of control both the brightness of it and the amount of blurriness of it here. So you can kind of get something that looks almost like a bit of a depth of field effect, you know? So that kind of works if you like the background and you want to keep a little bit of that ambience in there. But personally speaking, I have a tendency to kind of replace the background myself within something like Photoshop, you know? But one thing I do like to do here is at the very least to create that little bit of depth effect on the face itself, because I really like how that personally really looks, right? So if we're rendering out, let's say, a portrait, you know, we'll put, let's say, our camera somewhere about here. Let's go to render. I like the lighting right now. It looks really, really good to me. And then let's go to render here. And then let's go where, or rather, let's go to main camera, in fact. And let's go here within lens and let's create a depth of field effect. So let's go to focus. Okay, that's where we'll set this up. And let's set a depth of field. Here we go. And let's just play around with the focus distance here until it's kind of, we can see the eyes. I usually like to get rid of the near blur. It's really rare that I'm going to use that. So let's just put that to 0. And let me try around playing around till the eyes are perfectly sharp. And then we have our far blur here we can play around with. This is a bit higher. The max bokeh size is also going to affect. I think my focus distance is probably way too far in the back, in fact. Okay, let's bring this back forward. Oh, here we go, okay. And then you just play around with these settings until you get something that you like, really. Try not to overdo it, but just a little bit of it really makes a character really stand out, I feel like. I think this is too strong right now. We're kind of losing all of the hair. Obviously, you want to tweak your lights. You want to do all of that good stuff there. We could also make sure that this always gets set as a camera within the scene, and so that we can still, let's say, well, move the camera around when we want to change the position of lights and stuff like that. So we could definitely create a new camera from what we have right now. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's create a new camera. And now every time we go to camera 1, we'll be in this particular camera. But if we go back here on top to main camera, then we have a chance of still moving around here. And let me disable, in fact, the depth of field for our main camera. So this allows us to move around the scene using our main camera, but then we can always go back to camera 1 to get back to this particular setup here. And it looks like we've lost some of our values here. So this is camera 1. Yeah, it looks like our values have actually reset now. So our tone mapping, you can see that it's kind of looking a little bleh right now. So let's set this back to Reinhard. And I think we lost the depth of field too, in fact. We could keep the near depth of field, in fact, because it's kind of blurring the hair here a little bit, I think. Oh, it's not uninteresting. I can always go back here to my main camera. And let's say that I want to create a light here. I kind of want to have a bit of a reflection that is right here. So we can kind of see that it's caught over the cornea there. I can always put my camera like here. Maybe zoom out a little bit and then create a light here. So press Control L to create a light from that particular angle there. And now this light here, I can control its parameter, its intensity, these sorts of things independently. So I can kind of create another highlight here if I want. And there is, in fact, this tool I haven't really used, but I know that this tool is there where you can actually place a highlight. So let's just see where that is. There's that tool in there somewhere. I think it's this here. Highlight control. Is that it? Match highlight? Oh yeah, see how that works? You can actually place the highlight exactly where you want it to be. So why don't we place a highlight there? Let's go back to our camera 1, just like this. So we have a highlight here, that's good. Let's just reduce a little bit its diameter. Kind of want to have something that's kind of almost symmetrical with what's happening on the other side. I mean these two highlights here. Now this is, what light is this in fact? This is this light. Maybe I kind of want to get rid of it. But just probably just putting this here to 0, because I kind of like the color that it's adding, but I don't really want to have specular here. That's kind of cool. There's a bit of a blurriness right now, which may be coming from the depth of field. Yeah, it's like my depth of field isn't quite at the proper focus distance. Let me try something. You can see that the hair has a bit of a polygonal aspect to it. So I'm kind of interested to maybe select it. And then maybe we can subdivide it once. Hopefully it's not going to look too bad. No, it looks pretty good to me. In fact, I kind of like it. Okay. All right. Lighting's looking pretty good. I think all our materials are looking pretty good. We can just render this out, right? We could continue to tweak this, of course, as long as we want, but I think this is looking pretty good right now. So let's render this out. So to render this out here, I'll simply go to render, of course. We'll scroll all the way down, and where here we can export this out somewhere. Here I will export this out as a 4K texture or 4K render. So this thing here, right there. And format here, I really like to export this out as somewhere like either PSD, 16-bit, XR, these sorts of things. You can use, like, the best you can use, of course, is a 32-bit EXR, because that's all floating point data. That's really, really wonderful to play with. But in this case here, I think we can just try this as maybe 16-bit and see what this looks like, because I think that should be enough. And the sample here sets to 256, so that's pretty good. You really want to have a really high sample count to really be able to properly resolve things like very thin hairs. That value should work pretty well. And finally, we want to turn on transparency. Oh, here. So where it says render camera here. So we're rendering the main camera right now. So we don't want to do that. Let's do add camera 1, because that's what we want to render out. Turn off main camera. And let's render this out. And there you go. Once you look at that. So we have our alpha because we had rendered this out with transparency on. We could just go ahead here. And we could play around with this background and set this to whatever we want, really. We could play around and set this perhaps a bit darker. Could apply a little gradient on this if we wanted to. We could make something really, really cute with this. Could try, I don't know, could try something like this. Could try something like that, right? That kind of works pretty well. And yeah, I guess finally, like, the last things I kind of like to do on renders is just to use camera raw here. So within Photoshop, to go to camera raw here. And I like to use that on just to color correct pictures. We won't really do much of that right now, but I just wanted to show you just very quickly what it kind of looks like, right? So if we take a look here, so we probably have some space here to boost the highlights here a little bit. because we're kind of looking at this graph here, and there's a lot of data that is under the, I don't know, maybe this is like 75% here from black to white. So we could definitely kind of boost the highlight here a little bit. We could try around, play around with these highlights and these sorts of things. Maybe boost the shadows. We could play around with the temperature if we want this to be a bit, just a bit more, just a bit more on the yellow side of things. Here we have control for saturation and vibrance. Just boosting that just a little bit. That's kind of cool, right? And so I like to tweak things in here. If we kind of want to get rid of the purple that is here, maybe now I kind of don't really like it. Maybe we should have played around with the colors of that a little bit beforehand. With the color of these lights here, but I could always go in here and I could always like reduce here, play around with the saturation here of this purple light. Maybe just get rid of it completely or make it a bit more towards the blues or something. I could definitely do stuff like that here. Let's see this here. So I could do stuff like that here. So I don't necessarily always spend a whole lot of time doing this, but just coming in here and always just kind of playing around with these settings just a little bit. Okay, what happens if I sharpen this just a little bit? You can see here that the eyes, they really pop a lot more. I find it's very, very interesting just to come in here and play with these settings here a little bit, and never trying to create any sort of very specific recipe as much as just sort of explore and see where this kind of takes me. I particularly like these, in fact, these texture clarity and dehaze. I don't know if this, in this case, if these are necessarily going to work all that great or look all that great for us, but like I really like to play around with these because if you actually reduce here the texture value, you can actually make a subsurface shader like this look even more subsurfacey in a way. Because you can see that what it's kind of doing is that it's kind of reducing quite a lot. These kind of like, all the skin pores and kind of everything that's there, it's kind of toning these down. So what you're kind of getting instead is just a more sort of more general lighting, or just the feeling that the lighting is even more kind of general and even more diffuse over the face. So these are actually kind of really cool to play with. And sometimes you can counterbalance that by playing around here and boosting the clarity instead, which kind of gives you a lighting that's a bit more contrasted overall in a very diffuse way without affecting too much the small details. So you can kind of play around with these sorts of things. I think we're getting overexposed here a little bit, so let's bring these back down. And so on and so forth. So this isn't really a class on this. I just wanted for you to be aware that these kind of settings are there. There's obviously a lot of different ways that we can color correct and tweak a picture, tweak a render after the fact. There's a lot of different ways. There's a lot of very complicated ways. There's a lot of other softwares that can do those too. Maybe we'll explore more of those in the future. But for me, personally speaking, when I want to just render something out and I just want to throw it somewhere very quickly, I very rarely will just spit out a Marmoset Toolbag render and just call it a day. I always like to come in here and just tweak a little bit with stuff because it's very, very fast to do, but it also kind of allows you to just get a little bit more pop out of your surfaces. So you can see this was before and this is now. And I suppose what we could have done too is add a bit of a vignetting effect, which we kind of have a little bit with the background, with that radial symmetry or that radial kind of grid we've put in the background there. We kind of have a little bit of that vignetting that's kind of going on, but we could have boosted that more, And if I wanted to be fancier, I also could have gone in here and I could have played around with these lights too, of course, a lot more than what I have, Try to get a lighting that I personally like. Probably get rid of this light here that I turned out I don't like that much, that purple light, after all. But that's it. So that's the whole workflow. Can just spit out really nice render, easy, simple, but also looks really, really good, especially for the time for which you will put in there. So that's it. That is today's class. That was quite a lot to go through. So we've talked about, first of all, we've done a very detailed breakdown of Tifa's character model from Final Fantasy VII Remake. And second of all, we've really talked about the whole process to bring a particular model that we have within Marmoset Toolbag, set up different shaders. We've talked a lot about different shaders that we have at our disposal in there, whether that's the subsurface shader and a whole lot of different effects. We haven't talked that much about cloth, actually, cloth shader, but we don't really have satin here or anything else really at our disposal, so we didn't really have much of a chance to talk about that. But that's it. So we'll keep that for a topic in the future there. So that's it. Thanks for watching, and until next time, take care.